Uh, Carolyn, hello. Hi, Carolyn. Just unmute. Hi, Carolyn. I know you got your mic on and it looks like you got your camera on too, but I don't see
Yeah,
you.
I do. No, I don't. I don't have a picture. I haven't had a good picture of me in years.
But
Just
but okay, here comes somebody else, some owner. I don't know who that is. Anyhow, what you don't well, yeah, you should take a picture from when you were swimming, competing in
right
intramural
when I had.
swimming, or you could just put anything up. What about the camera? Does the camera work?
The camera works. I just got it covered over. I haven't. I don't use it.
Oh,
Uh,
that's what you do. I'm looking at a cover. It looks like a burlap factor of some kind, brown.
it's a Band-Aid,
Oh,
actually.
it's just a Band-Aid, huh? Okay.
It's a Band-Aid, right?
Well, all right.
Uh-huh. Two of them work better. One is brownish. Two of them work better.
Oh, I see.
Oh, so you're doing the show tonight?
Yeah, well, Jim will probably be joining us soon.
Uh-huh.
He's always doing some kind of Zoom thing. I have to ask you a question. I'm playing some music in the background. Do you hear it?
I do not.
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
That's interesting. I hear it, but nobody else does. Okay. So it's a nice piece. There's Tom Morgan.
Okay.
We're going to get the screen a little bigger, you think?
What screen? Your screen?
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't come through very, very, very big.
Well, that's what you got to go to view at the top right and pick what you want. You
Well,
want the
okay.
speaker or the gallery or multi speakers or whatever you see there.
Yeah, no, I think we'll see. There it is. There, I got you in living color.
Now, I had an argument with Jim about this because I think this is a picture of Columbia University, the main area, but he didn't think so.
No, I thought it was your house. I thought that's where you
No,
lived.
no, I can't. Well, yeah, right up here in a corner house.
If you
Yeah.
can
I
move
mean,
over a little, I can tell you what I think.
go ahead.
I
But
can't see the picture behind you anymore. Oh, there. Oh, oh, oh.
I got to turn that video off that I'm listening to.
That looks
Where
like
is that?
Columbia. Yeah, it does.
Well, everything shrunk in size. Yeah.
I don't know
So
why. It's
now you're on pretty much full screen. Yeah.
and then in the up right hand corner, you should see a double box, an X, and to the left of that, a double box.
Yeah, I
That
hit that. I hit that once. Yeah.
if you hit the double box, it's going to make it smaller. And then when the smaller thing you hit it, the box, it goes bigger. It goes full screen. You can just go under view on the button view. It says full screen on the button. See it? You see that button, the little tic tac next to view
Well, I don't know. I've got it.
up at the top. View, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe that's as big as it's going to get.
Well, it should be full screen if you want.
Yeah, yeah, but it didn't do it.
Okay.
And so I don't know why.
Rename Thomas. What's your last name again? Thomas
Morgan,
Morgan. There we go.
Morgan.
Put your name in there. Anyhow, what do you think's the most relevant thing that happened since the last time you were here, like in the last week? Let's go around just while we're waiting for more people to come in. What do you think was the most relevant, significant thing people should pay attention to?
Oh boy, I don't know. I'm still dealing with this thing.
Okay, Carolyn, what do you?
Let me play with it a little bit. I don't know why
Go ahead.
it's.
Go ahead.
Well, one
Go
of
ahead.
them is that the Supreme Court seems to be at least aware of the problem, which I don't think they were 2 weeks ago, and they may actually be addressing it.
You mean trying to tighten up?
Yeah, figuring out that Trump may not be their best friend for life. I hope anyway. And I see a lot of action, not a lot, but several sites looking to go after some Supreme Court judges, which would be nice to see.
Oh, to get them impeached or to increase the number of judges?
I don't want to increase them. I want to get rid of a couple that are on there now.
Well, that if the if it stays at 9 judges and you get rid of them, they can Trump will nominate 2 others that'll be younger and more extreme. And that's
Well, the number is not set in stone, as I understand it.
pardon me, what's in stone?
The number is not set in stone.
That's right. But I'm saying if you get rid of a Supreme Court judge, the
There's no
president's going
necessity to replace
to
them.
nominate somebody.
Well, he could, but he doesn't have to. I mean, he could nominate 5 more if he wanted to.
No, I don't know. Let's see. What determines the number of people sitting on the court, right? That's the question.
It's not. There's no legal number. It was set pretty much by custom, and it grew evidently, but there's no fixed number, as far as I understand. Anyway, I think that's fairly significant, and I'm getting a lot more stuff coming through talking about possible dementia in our leader. And I think that's significant that people are actually discussing that.
Okay. That's Tom coming back. You think that the 25th Amendment, you mean?
That what?
That's the 25th Amendment allows you to remove the president for incompetence and not
Well,
cognitive.
what I've seen is just some evidence from various appearances he's made, and without even mention of the 25th Amendment, just the fact that he seems a little bit off.
Yeah, but you can't. So what? That's an opinion. I'm saying the 25th Amendment gives the House or the Senate, let's see, 25th Amendment, right?
I don't remember which one it is, but I was just noticing that more people are willing to talk about it now.
Okay. Well, yeah, they got nothing else to talk about. Okay. The president dies, resigns, or is removed. The vice president becomes president. If there is a vacancy in the office of vice president, the president nominates a new vice president who must be confirmed by both houses of Congress. The president can voluntarily transfer power to the vice president by informing Congress in writing. If the president is unable to perform duties due to illness or other reasons, the vice president and a majority of the cabinet can declare the president incapacitated allowing the vice president to assume the role of acting president until the president is able to resume duties. This amendment ensures a clear line of succession and addresses situations where the president cannot fulfill their responsibilities. I remember that specifically when Bush or somebody had, oh, now I'm terrible with names. We all suffer from that. He had this guy who looked like he was a football coach, not looked like a regular guy, but not competent. They called it, it guarantees that I won't be assassinated or eliminated or voted out because then you'll get this other jerk. Can you remember who I'm talking about? That was with Bush. Who was the vice
Okay.
president with Bush?
Okay.
All
Now
right.
I got you. Now I got you full screen.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Miracle of
So
modern communications. Huh?
yeah. So I was just reading the 25th Amendment. But the point is, it's the last one. If the president is unable to perform duties due to illness or other reasons, the vice president and a majority of the cabinet can declare the president incapacitated, allowing the vice president to assume the role of acting president until the president is able to resume duties. This amendment ensures a clear succession. But doesn't even have to go to Congress. This is the cabinet and the vice president just say, look, this guy's off his nuts. He's crazy. So let him take a break, and the vice president become the president.
Well, you think we need to do that now?
Oh, I don't. Caroline says people are talking about it. But what you would wind up with politically is J.D. Vance.
That's
It's
a
not
scary
like,
thought. That's a scary thought.
I guess, you know,
What does he spend his active duty time in Guantanamo Bay? Isn't he's in his one at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba?
he spent time working there.
Well, one of them did. I thought it was him, maybe. You know.
Well, here's somebody who'll tell us. Let's bring in Julian Spencer to this as soon as he gets hooked up here while we're waiting for Jim. Julian, we got you pretty much. Turn your
Hey,
mic on.
Ken.
Hi. Oh, there you are. Look at that. See
Yeah,
that? He's got a good camera. So
we
we
can.
were going over, do you know Carolyn Burden from New York?
I've seen her several times.
Okay. So she was bringing up that some people she knows have been talking about maybe removing President Trump because of his, senility, or he's incompetent. Not incompetent, but his senility. The kind of a thing that everybody says Joe Biden should have been taken out 2 days after he was appointed. But so she says people are talking about that with Trump. So I'm bringing over the specifics of Amendment 25, which says just the cabinet has to decide he's in bad shape. The cabinet and the vice president. And say, get him out of here. And then the vice president is the president. So you got rid of Trump, who I think is more manageable than J.D. Vance. I don't think J.D. Vance I mean, I don't know much about his background or anything, but he's not quite as mature and open and relaxed as Trump. I think it
Well,
would be worse.
uh, I hate to offer my opinion, but
Go ahead.
I grew up in the 70s and became, I guess, politically aware at that time, particularly when in 78 when the Israelis hit Lebanon, and then there was the Shah and the hostages. And so I watched the election campaign of Reagan versus Carter, including a little bit before the nomination. So what I learned from that late 70s into the 80s was to be very, very careful not to be tricked by what I thought was sort of off-center media propagandization. And the media hated Ronald Reagan for like half a decade. It took a long time for them to warm up to him. For the same reason, I may not like Trump personally. I certainly enjoy the South Park cartoons about him. I've watched all three; they're hilarious. But I think he's as a business person, and my wife's a business person. There's a lot to respect there. He knows an awful lot about how to do the most important thing in America, which is to run a business, which is where the government gets all their tax revenue. Um, and he may not be as he's definitely a high roller. He's not running a small business, so small businesses are the big employers. But people don't like rich people, and they don't like speculators. But frankly, speculators and hedge funds are the only ones that can aggregate the funding you need for the giant projects that the government won't do, like building the internet. So honestly, I don't fantasize about Trump being thrown out of power. I actually think, and I'm a Canadian, I actually think his tariffs make sense. I think before you can get into fair trade, you have to reindustrialize. And America, and it's not only the Republicans, it was the Democrats, it was everybody. The Americans were moving all of their factories offshore to enemy states like China. And that was a really dumb idea. So, I think free trade is great, but you have to do it between countries that are willing to share and never take resources to fight each other. So I think we have to let Trump play through. I mean, the great thing about Trump is that we talk about the KGB controlling him, or I guess Israelis controlling him, or whatever. I actually think Trump is more free than Obama or Clinton or Bush, and so he's the only one that can make this difficult switch to reindustrializing America by putting the tariffs up. So sorry if I'm not participating in the coup against the palace, but I hope he's healthy for his term. Now I'm worried that he's not going to help the moment China invades Taiwan. I'm afraid he's going to try to negotiate in the same way he's negotiating over Ukraine. But you know what? I also understand, and we've seen this so many times. The veterans coming from Vietnam going, we were lied to. The the veterans coming back from the attack on Kuwait complaining about Gulf War syndrome, which is probably the depleted uranium round, and the Americans complaining about Afghanistan and Iraq. And so veterans, young men want to be lied to. They like the action. They want to get into sort of the shoot 'em up. I understand that these men, when they're older, realize how incredibly expensive war is, and how politicians lie often about the possibility of victory. Whether it's Eisenhower in Korea, or Johnson in Vietnam, or George W. in Iraq. So I get why. And those Europeans, man, holy cow, they're annoying. They never pay for anything. The French insist on being French, the English, the Germans, the Italians, and it's left to the Americans not only to kick them together to work, but the Americans have to end up paying for everything, or paying for an awful lot of it, a wildly disproportionate amount. So Russia's weak now. Russia's got a manufacturing base less than South Korea, slightly ahead of Indonesia. So you know what? I don't think the Russians can do that much damage to Europe. So I think it's okay that the Americans are pulling back and making the Europeans a little bit afraid and making them bear the burden. I don't think Europe's going to collapse because Russia takes over Ukraine. And if you look at
parts of Ukraine,
no, I think Putin would take everything if he could.
If he could.
If he could, yeah. I don't think he can, obviously, but I find it difficult fundamentally criticizing Donald Trump on the big issues of the economy, and as far as security in Europe, I think he's having a very positive effect, waking the Europeans up. I hope he stays healthy for the next 3.5 years. Sorry.
No, that's fine. You're not alone.
Yeah,
and then the other part of that is this. If anybody is afraid to say that because they're stepping out of the agenda of agreeing with everything on the left, most of their friends and most of their personal beliefs are in accord with the left agenda. Let's say women's rights and no racism, and and so forth. and empathy for the people who are suffering, and maybe even major things like global warming and other things like that, and corruption. Yeah, I think the majority of the population would be opposed to the Supreme Court finding about corporations being people, and that
Yeah.
therefore they can do whatever they want. Everybody just goes like, "Oh well, I can't do anything about that." That should have caused a whole like national boycott or something. But anyhow, so but for to step out, somebody like you have to be able to come out and say that. I mean, I think I totally agree with you. And that doesn't mean you agree with everything that Trump's doing, far from it. You're saying that he can do the job, and he's got his attention on getting those goals accomplished, getting Europe to start take responsibility for their own defense, and getting the tariffs adjusted, which have been in existence since 1945. All of these countries had tariffs on goods we sent there, and that we didn't have tariffs on that when they came in here. So it's just a catch-up game, and it put things in balance.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I mean,
it's,
I think Reagan made the right decision by bringing down the tariffs, but it was just not reciprocated.
yeah.
And,
Oh,
and Trump is certainly not bringing tariffs back to a catastrophic level. I think he's bringing them back to what they were in the 70s. So, it's for me, it's an adjustment. That's right. And I want to make one other thing. There are many things that of course women and the U.S. Still votes tribally somewhat by ethnicity. In countries like Canada, we vote almost entirely on gender lines. We vote. It's the liberal and the liberal and the NDP are women's parties, and the conservatives are a male party. Trump, by giving young men jobs, is actually going to destroy his own support base. And I think he knows it, because once young men have jobs and they're no longer angry, they're going to go back to the left, which is where they were, a generation ago. To be honest, I teach students who are young men, and I used to have to deal with young leftist men. They don't exist right now, or the balance between the left and the right among the young in universities is very different, right? Certainly the professors are left wing because of when they were hired in the 80s and the 90s, but the students, the young men, they're definitely more right wing. If Trump gets them jobs, especially the ones that don't have university degrees, you're going to see, even if there's no labor movement, you're going to see a shift of those people back to the left, because the left is good at solving quality of life issues, justice issues, distributional issues. So Trump is like a reverse Margaret Thatcher. Like Margaret Thatcher created conservatives by turning people that were renting homes that were blue collar workers into homeowners, and so they suddenly became much more interested in the economy. Trump is going to restore the left, as bizarre as that sounds. That's my belief.
just by getting jobs and ownership to the younger generation.
The
In
young
other
men.
words, you're saying the younger generation, there's a lot of pundits or scientists talking about the upcoming calamity of the inverted demography. There's less people between 20 and 30 than there are 60 to 80. So there's like a ice cream cone instead of being like a pyramid. So, how are these, there's not, and mostly people do, and it's true for most of us, the era or the epic of your life when you're acquiring things is from 20 or 18 and minimum up to 35, 45. And then you say, I don't need another TV. I got a good TV. So you stop buying things, right? Maybe you take a look at more investments and so forth, but you're not, you already got 5 suits and that you don't wear at all. What how many ties do you have? It's hanging on a hook somewhere. We don't wear ties anymore, but we used to, right? You used to have different ties. Now they're just sitting in a closet somewhere. So you stop consuming. So then there's less people consuming. So you're saying once, let's say, I don't know that it's not Gen Z or Gen X, whatever it is, people who are now in their 20s, they're having a
Millennials, I
tough,
think. It must be
millennials.
Gen Z. It's Gen Z, I think.
Yeah, you think that they're once their status goes up and they're making more money, then they'll start acquiring. Then maybe somewhere they'll find a house they can afford to buy.
Well,
And you know, yeah,
I think there. No, I think there's a strike. There was a statistic I saw recently on Breaking Point, which is that uh, what you don't have are young men who are married and have a house. That
uh,
we've never been in this bad a situation. We have some men who have houses and some men who are married who live in apartments, but not both. What I think the problem is that we are living a long time. I'm mid career. I'm in my 50s and I'm mid career. In other words, I expect to retire when I'm like 75 or 80.
yeah.
Normally, people retired at 65 2 generations ago at the university. Young people have no more labor support. There's no more labor action supporting them.
Well, but you have to get off the stage. If you don't retire at
Exactly.
65, you got,
My
excuse me,
solution.
excuse me. Here's a,
Yeah, I know.
the audience applauded, go home.
Go home. I know. So we need an artificial go home.
Uh-huh. Well, maybe you can get recruited onto
But there has to be
a crew going to Mars. You know, maybe we'll get the guys over 75 to take a, let's pioneer and
well,
go to Mars.
I don't think people need to get rid of me physically. I think what they need to do is tax established older people. I know it sounds crazy, but
No.
I mean, it's not gonna, yeah, it won't be feasible, but we need to have a large shift of money from the boomers and Gen X for the people who should be buying homes, which are the under 35s. I don't know how to do it fairly. I don't know how to tax. Maybe have ridiculous property tax that's progressive. The longer you own your home, the more tax you pay. And if you're a new homeowner, you get ridiculously low government-backed interest rates. We need to put young people in homes because that's how they accumulate wealth. And it's the reason men are so pro-Trump. They're angry.
So, but you think if he satisfies that in terms of giving them the ability to become stabilized consumers, that then they'll turn left and say, well, now I can have some empathy for the underdog.
Yeah, I think the housing crisis is a major reason why men voted for Trump.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because if men have no homes, they don't look responsible and they're not gonna be able to get a wife. Now, there's other reasons they can't get a wife, which is just people are having families later. But I think that's a major factor, which is we're creating a generation of permanent children.
Ah,
That's my theory. When I look at my students, in Canada, we have a worse housing crisis than the US, worse. But it's a pretty much a standard problem across Europe. Yeah, yeah.
well, but isn't that problem? I mean, I want other people to go with. Let me just throw this up. There's been, a capture of the population by urban territories, and that's where the housing is higher. In other words, you can still go to Pennsylvania or South Carolina. You can buy a house in good shape for 150,000. You might not like the neighborhood that much, but 150,000. And I have a friend who bought a house in oh, what's the guy's name? The American Indian who competed in the Olympics, Jim Thorpe. Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. She bought a house on a credit card for $10,000.
Wow.
It's not much of a place, and it was about 5 years ago, but still. So there are properties, but all the jobs and the high tech and the business, where's the action, baby? In New York, LA, Houston, Dallas, maybe, I don't know, Chicago. I'm not a middle of I don't know that much about the flyover country myself. So, I say LA, New York, San Francisco, Florida, Miami, that's where the action is. But that's action in most countries. It's along the borders that can communicate with other countries, along the coasts. It's not usually that developed in the middle of the country unless there's a major resource mining or something. So, but through in the middle of the country, there's lots of available housing, but there may not be employment. And there may not be much of an opportunity for courtship, because did you ever walk down Madison Avenue in New York?
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you see? Lots of gorgeous women.
Yeah. Clearly,
Right?
yeah, past my pay scale.
But yeah, but that's because they get drawn into the city. If you're in Podunk, Iowa, it's you're gonna find a girl, maybe maybe a beautiful girl, but maybe a very competent girl. So anyhow, but I'm glad you have an opinion like that. That's not the standard thing. So you're not willing to step on Trump.
No, no,
Uh-huh.
I'm hoping he'll get stuff done. I'm hoping he'll take some advice on some foreign policy issues. But again, I remember 5 years of berating Ronald Reagan, and then a decade later, people look back at the good old times. So I'm very, very careful not to be influenced.
But for everybody here who might not know what you're doing, what kind of courses are you delivering? What kind of topics?
I'm a
What's your
political scientist in international relations, so I teach a course on causes of war, strategic studies, how to build and use nuclear weapons, a course on Chinese strategic studies. I teach a course on American foreign policy, and I teach an intro class, and I do a couple of statistics classes at the graduate level. So basically, military type stuff.
All right. So this is I'm taking advantage of monitoring or hosting this. Do you consider that the political effort to indoctrinate the public through the media that we got to watch out for Russia? Anybody who works with Russia is an enemy. Russia is the biggest threat to our existence. They keep trying to talk about this thing. It's like Russia invaded Ukraine. Nobody wants to hear about what happened before that. They just go, Russia's evil. Do you think that what do you think of that in terms of like what you're saying about the politics of war?
Well, obviously, I'm like many Americans. I'm shaped by when I was in the military, which is during
Yeah.
the war in the '80s, and so I'm generally supportive of Ukraine. I understand people's uh, skepticism that the U.S. government is being honest, and the constant American worry that you have war profiteers that are encouraging the war and influencing policy. I completely get that. The Cato Institute has proposed many solutions over the last 3 years on how to supervise what American funding, when it did go to Ukraine, how it could be ensured that it didn't end up being taken by oligarchs or sifted off the top by bureaucrats. So I completely agree with it. But my lesson of the Cold War. I went to the USSR in 1987 before the Cold War ended, and it struck me that the USSR was it had a much larger population than the US. It was about 20% larger population. And then you had communist China, which was much bigger. And it reminded me that we are always outnumbered. And if we can find even a moderately democratic country out there, we got to back them. And if we don't, they'll end up like Czechoslovakia or Poland, that were basically taken over by the Soviets in the 1940s through manipulation, military threats, execution of Democrats. So Ukraine is flawed. Taiwan is flawed. And so, we need to guide them so that they're more liberal and protect them. Once you lose a democracy, you're not going to get it back, because it's very, very easy to erase the population. The Czechs were a democracy in the 1930s, and the Soviets did a really, really good job of cleaning out that whole memory of being a democracy and executing large numbers of politicians. Mostly people just ran away. They escaped to the West. And what you're left with is, a country that's easily controlled. So, we're outnumbered. And so for that reason, I obviously prefer Zelensky, who I consider, again, a flawed individual, but showing great courage under the circumstances. I prefer him to Vladimir Putin, who, Vladimir Putin is the man I want to run Russia, because I don't want Russia to collapse again. It would create a lot more chaos in Asia. And Russia is on the verge of collapse. Chechnya is a week away from declaring independence all the time. They have their own army. But I don't want Putin, while he's keeping Russia together, to invade democracies. So, it's a difficult game.
Okay, but you see, in other words, from what was going on during the Cold War, after, even before the end of World War II, the conflict between democracy and tyranny, and I keep forgetting the words. Not, I don't want to say communism, but totalitarianism. There's that ongoing. That's still there. That's still the presence and a thing you have to be concerned about, because there's still intention to establish totalitarian regimes and fascist. Just follow. Top-down government. No,
I mean,
no.
the essential formula, just so I could sort of crystallize it, the essential formula is nuclear weapons are very easy to manufacture. They're remarkably inexpensive. Between 1958 and 1961, the US manufactured one warhead every 55 minutes. So you can imagine how many they manufactured in a month. Each of those warheads, because of the economy of scale, costs about 1.2 million. Today, sorry, one sec. Today, nuclear weapons are the technology to build them are well known. The scariest thing is putting them in orbit, basically FOBs, fractional orbital bombardment system, where you can put nuclear weapons into orbit and then bring them down anytime. And virtually any medium developing country can do it, including Iran. So in a world where nuclear weapons are cheap and easy to build, we need to make the world as democratic as soon as possible. Now, that's the basic formula.
All right, Kenny.
Go for it, Jim.
Kenny, Michael McPherson, how are you, Mike? You have to unmute.
Hello,
Michael,
hello.
I'm sure you have an opinion about this. Michael is the president of Veterans for Peace.
You already
So-
say that. I'm the executive director. I'm
The
not
executive
president.
director. So, Michael, we're talking about, so I'm just curious what your opinions are, because it's always valuable to hear your point of view. Go on, Mike.
I appreciate that. I came in on you all talking, so it's hard for me to just bust in with an opinion because I'm not
That's not
exactly
gonna
sure
stop
what you're
you, baby.
talking about. I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about.
Well, we're
So,
talking. Well, we were talking. I guess Kenny was talking about.
Oh, I can give you a real fast, because it was very
yeah,
short.
please.
It started with, should we, people are chatting about removing Trump because he's senile. So then we checked in the 25th Amendment and see, you just wind up with J.D. Vance. That's what would happen. So, and then it went to Julian, because he's one of the, has a background as a political science teacher and stuff. And he was going over like, no, he actually thinks Trump is doing a good job in terms of forcing Europe and NATO to reorganize and try to take responsibility and get us off the table. And then talking about some other things he's doing is good, because he's got, excuse me, everybody, he's got the gunyats. He can do it. He's a big businessman. He's not afraid. He doesn't care what you say. You could throw
York
a
for
pile
balls.
of piss on him. He just
Yeah.
doesn't care.
That's
He
true.
just moves forward and he exaggerates, and then he said, I want to time it 2,000 times tariff. Okay, I'll cut it in half. That's the way he does business.
All right.
Yeah.
So
we had-
I'll let Kenny let Michael
But
respond, because
that's,
I've
but there we
got
went.
yeah, I got an
So
opinion about
Julian brought up that there's basically, we can't abandon our being cautious about totalitarian countries, or any countries that's not democracy, because of the ongoing threat of nuclear weapons, which now is accelerated because they can be dropped from space.
Yeah.
So that's where we are.
Well, that's a lot to unpack, and So I guess I could say a few things. One, the only country, and I'm not one to demonize the United States all the time. I love the United States. This is my country, So that's what I'm about to say is not to demonize the United States, but it's a fact. The only country that has dropped nuclear weapons has been a democracy. This country right here. So I don't know why the idea of democracies, if the whole world was a democracy or something like that, it's going to save keep nuclear war from not happening. That doesn't make sense since we're the only people to have ever dropped it. As far as when you talk about which I think is true, a struggle between authoritarianism and I guess a certain level of self-government. Um, that's not only an international struggle, that's always a struggle within nations. I mean, there's a struggle that we're having right now in the United States of America. And the United States really started out as a authoritarian fascist government. Um, you couldn't have slavery and the kind of ethnic cleansing and all that kind of stuff if it wasn't. Um, so I just want to be clear that I'm all for democracy. That's one of the reasons I love this country, and the fact we're a republic, right? So I love this nation. But we have a lot of struggles here when it comes to that. It's not just a international struggle; it's a global struggle. And also, our founding generation, as I call them, not founding fathers, but founding generation, believe that people get to choose what kind of government they want to live under. They thought this form would be the best, and I agree. But I don't think they were trying to make everybody be a democracy. Uh, they said that people get to choose. Um, so we need to let people choose. Some people want to live in theocracies for whatever reason. I don't, you know. So I would be careful about that. And and the last thing I guess I would say when it does come to global struggle, um, myself, I think patriarchy plays the biggest role in it. I think it's very interesting that no matter um, what conflict you look at, whoever wins the conflict after it's over, men will be the ones in charge. It doesn't matter what conflict you look at. I think that says something about the conflicts themselves, um, and what really drives war. Not to say that if we had a matriarchal global world, there wouldn't be wars. I don't think that's the case. I think there would still be. So don't. I'm not saying that is a human problem. But the nature of them today, and how men like to dominate, which I also think has something to do with why we're not really dealing with climate change. Um, I think men have a problem. And the only reason I bring all that up is because you're talking about big ideas here. So I wanted to introduce that one in there because I do believe it plays a role in everything.
Thank you, Michael. Why don't we, Carolyn?
Oh, it's nice to see you, Jim.
Yeah, nice to see you, Mike. Michael, I remember you
Thank
always
you,
used to call me
Michael. Yeah,
Michael.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Julie or Carolyn, what do you think about all this? I mean, 'cause it's funny. I was going to hear talking NYU next week about extremism and misogyny. Someone just did a book about that, and I was looking at this situation. I don't know if they've identified this guy who did the killings in Minneapolis yet, but it's the same old, here's this guy, and look, I'm someone who likes the Second Amendment, but I do feel that you have to have sane, reasonable laws. I mean, imagine if New York City had open carry laws; it'd be like the Wild West. So I just, this issue that you raise about patriarchy, I think is really interesting, Michael. But Carolyn, Julie, what do you have to say about this?
Well, if I could jump in and say they did identify the shooter, and this time it was somebody allegedly who was transgendered, and I guess the mother had ties to the school. That was the last reporting that I saw on it. I don't know if they've clarified that or not, but it was somebody who transitioned from being male to female. So it makes it an unusual shooting in that it's one of the few where there's a trans person as the culprit. And allegedly, according to Fox News, the person had killed Trump or F Trump on his gun or her gun. So that today's shooting would be an outlier, I guess, among the traditional mass shootings that we've seen in America. But then jumping back to the idea of, democracies and protecting democratic countries, I think I have to agree with what Michael said in that, Trump may be, I would not agree with it, but if the argument is that he is a good business person and that makes him an efficient leader, I would question sort of what the argument is in favor of his leadership capabilities if your position is that that we as a world need to protect democracies, and what he's doing every day is sort of eroding that constitution and eroding our freedoms, how is the position then that, it almost seems like they're two different things, right? He's overly qualified because he's such a good business person, which is debatable, right? Depending on what facts you look at, his personal history with business isn't necessarily all that impressive. Maybe he's inflated his net worth in certain times and deflated it in other times when it suited him. So who knows what the actual value of his success is? But what about all of the negative that he's doing? And as somebody who teaches war, are there any concerns about the fact that he's first fortified the Capitol and now he's, marching the National Guard out, or planning to march the National Guard out to militarize our streets against citizens? And, in what way does that make him a good leader? Do you have concerns about that as well?
You know what's funny about that, Julie? What I'm learning from doing all this programming about the American Revolution, which, Michael, I'm deeply into right now, is and I'm, going to make a good point of doing several years of this, is, we have the issue of King George III. We have the issue of quartering. We have the issue of occupation of Boston, which led and reinforced the inflammation of the people in Massachusetts to rebel. And, you know, it's really interesting to read all that history. And in particular, we're going to get a lot into the issue of slavery at the period of time. Because what's interesting to me is people began using the Declaration of Independence in 1776 as an emancipatory abolitionist document. You begin to see it being read in black church congregations in New England as an emancipatory document.
Yep.
And so that's the kind of
Yep.
stuff I'm looking at, which sort of was an eye opener to me, because the other thing is, of course, there were African Americans in the army in front of Boston, and Washington kicks them out when he takes command of the army in 1775, but they still are there. So the issue, so it's sort of interesting to sort of go through all this and begin to revisit it all. But Carolyn, what do you think about all this? What do you think about the issue that Michael raises about patriarchy? Because sometimes, I mean, there's a part of that I do agree with. I mean, sometimes people will have these analyses which they totally based on patriarchy. And so sometimes I tend to find that a little bit simplistic, because I could point out matriarchal societies where war is justified. I mean, look, I can think of examples in Africa, of course. But what do you think, Carolyn, about this?
Hi, I'm sorry I was off the call. My muting my audio killed my video, so I haven't been here. I've been listening with half an ear and trying to work with tech support to get back to you. I can now see you all, and I'm still not visible, but I can hear you and talk to you. And I missed your question. Please.
Oh, well, I hear you, feel you. That sounds like a rock song. I'm thinking about, Michael raised the issue of patriarchy, which we rarely raise, by the way. It's usually, and I know Julie's raised the issue about deportation, which I've also been thinking of pretty carefully. I mean, what does that all mean? But, what do you think about the question, Michael, if you can rephrase it, if you will, but he's talking about the issue of, after the dust settles, you still have men rule. Is that more or less correct, what you said, Michael?
Yeah, and people, let me just be clear. I'm not saying in a matriarchal society we would not have wars. I really have to say that so many times because people kind of like jump right on that.
Right,
So
right.
I'm not saying that. I am saying that the nature of how we do wars, the imperialism, the whole idea of mutual destruction, all those things, total domination. I think it would be different if we had a more balanced leadership, and the fact that if no matter the conflict, like you said, once the dust settles, men will still be in charge. It doesn't matter what ideology, what religion, whatever. And I think we have to look at that.
So what do you think, Carolyn?
That's heavy. I am totally off of that topic. I'm still worried about the rule of law in my country right now, not where it's going to go. Let me think on that.
All right. All right.
Music.
Well, the reason it's interesting to raise that is, of course, I was watching yesterday that incredible performance, um, the live, I think it was one of the longest press conferences a la performance art things we ever saw with Trump. Basically, it's sort of like Der Fuhrer with his, Mein Fuhrer, I have this. I mean, it's just amazing to watch. And, I can't believe that Trump, is he so delusional that, because he was talking about, well, some people think I'm a dictator. Yeah, you're goddamn right we do. And, it's, I have to disagree with Jillian about this because what I see, again, reading the ideas, and I'm sitting here now getting into the political philosophy, the debates that occurred from 1763 to 1775, and these guys are bringing up the Romans. They're bringing up the example of deterioration of the republic under the Romans. And, it's not that big a stretch to talk about, well, if you have somebody basically usurping the Constitution, and who was sworn to defend the Constitution, right? Like a lot of people here have been throughout their lives. And then, of course, decides to usurp the Constitution in 2020, throw it out the door, tries to implement a coup d'etat, and then fails. But then, we now have him back in office. And then what is he doing? He's taking Article 2 and he's essentially transforming the presidency into an Article 2 dictatorship. And all this stuff of him practicing, doing what he's doing in Washington, D.C. Look, I've lived in Washington. I've been in Washington. I know people got ripped off in Washington. Who's going to defend street crime and some guy carjacking somebody? Nobody. But, there's wider issues in this because he's trying to normalize the use of the military and integrating it with law enforcement. And, some people are raising the question of, well, is it, the SA? Is he doing the storm up? I mean, I think Lucian Truscott, who was a West Point graduate, brought up the question of, is it creating the Sturm up the Lung? I'd say it's more creating the Staatsgeheimnis, which is the Gestapo. I mean, what is he doing? What is he doing? I mean, and then he's going to think that he's going to do this in Chicago. He's going to do it, he's going to do it to reinforce his base. And then imagine if he came to New York. I mean, this is nuts. I mean, you'd really need a lot of manpower to deal with New York City. And, people are, it's just really ridiculous to think about. Although I think he would do it if Mamdani wins the mayorship. I think he'll like use it as an excuse to take over the city. And so where are we heading with all this stuff? I mean, it has to be opposed. And I don't want to be nice about it with him at all. To me, it's anathema to what being an American is, to have this guy in power, basically trampling on the most. I mean, like some of us here. I mean, some of us here go back to the Revolution in the Revolutionary War, and like I think now, obviously, my relatives who fought in the Revolution, obviously fought differently than I do now, of course. But did they want to have a new king come into power?
Okay,
I
Jim.
mean, yeah,
Yeah, you can go back in history and find, I know 5 million, 5 billion people that have deceased that wouldn't like Trump to be president. And I got the evidence of it. What about the half of the country or the third of the country that
well.
supports Trump and disagrees with you? You want to put them in a cell? What do you want to
No, I'm
do?
not. I know I don't want to put them in a cell. That's why I go. That's why I enjoy fighting with them. I enjoy arguing with them. I get
You're
off.
not arguing with him.
Oh no, I
You're
enjoy that.
promoting. No,
Kenny.
number
I
one,
go. I
attack.
go and troll the Fox News feed. I have a great time
Yeah.
doing it.
Okay.
And that's me learning how they view him.
Yeah.
Because some of them, of course, and they're not. I have friends
No,
who
no,
go.
no, no, no. Let's take another
Yeah,
person like the guy in Tibet, the guy, the Dalai Lama.
Tibet, the Dalai Lama.
Yeah,
What the hell does he have to do with Trump?
nothing. But
All right,
there's people who like him and people who don't. People who like Buddhism and people who hate it. There's people who
true.
like communism and people who hate it. So
Yeah.
you can't just go absolutely cosmic evaluation, totally objective. This
Yeah.
guy is the worst pit that's ever occurred.
Well, but wait,
He's never
Well,
done
but
anything
okay,
right.
let's before someone else jumps in. Look, we
You're
fought a
just too
war after
one-sided.
the World War
You
II.
gotta be, you gotta
What?
be tolerant of your opponent.
All right. Well, I am tolerant. I am tolerant. I'm saying that I don't like fascism. Period. I mean, I'm tolerant. I mean, yeah, you want to be a fascist? That's cool. Right on, man. But I'm just saying I don't like that. Okay.
Is
All
it
right.
was
Can
one question
I
was
jump in
the,
here?
the guy who took it was Castro a fascist?
No, he was a communist.
No, he wasn't. Castro wanted to meet with the United States and become
Okay. Thank you,
democratic.
Julie, for correcting me. All right. Thank you. All right. Yes, that's true. And we repulsed him in the period of time
Well,
when he,
I looked up the
So we
definition
refused
of,
to meet him.
according to the existing definition of fascism,
yeah.
a lot of the world leaders of communist societies are basically fascist. It's a top-down or utilitarian. They tell the people what time to wake up, what time to go to sleep,
Well,
and and that's it. It's a fascist. The government controls everything. That's
well,
fascism.
all right. Okay. We could get into some, I'm
You don't
sure.
have to have a small mustache. You don't have to speak Italian or German. You can be a fascist in Vietnam, in China, anywhere. You can be a fascist in Staten
Well,
Island.
a Stalinist communist regime is different than a fascist nationalist. But let other people talk.
Okay,
You and
yeah,
I argue
yeah.
about this all the time.
That's the major reason I
Yeah,
wanted to
go on.
interrupt you.
Let other
So,
people jump in here.
yeah,
Let
go
me
ahead.
jump in with a brief analogy. I've taught for years, and listening to Trump um, reminds me of too many instances in which a student comes up to discuss a paper which he's obviously plagiarized, because I know he doesn't have the intelligence to write what he presented as a paper, and I'm questioning his sources. I'm trying to get him to explain something that he wrote that he obviously has no comprehension of. And so he resorts to a phrase or two that he may have memorized from the text, somebody else exposing an incident or an idea, but he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I get that feeling that we're dealing with Trump as if he were a rational person. He is not. He's quoting somebody who told him to fire somebody else. He has no idea why. He doesn't know where those people are going to get their next paycheck from. He doesn't care. It's not his job. His job is to do what he's being told. And I'm trying to figure out who those people are pulling his strings, because the man is very shrewd. He's also in debt and needs money badly, and he's getting it. And he's getting it in the worst possible way that we're allowing. And my feeling is, where the hell is my government? Why don't I have a government that is working the way it's supposed to? They have a crazy person here. Why don't they deal with it? And
Uh,
that is the level at which I'm looking at what he writes and says. And the man is a puppet. Part of it, he's pulling his own strings, and he's very good at what he does, which is getting money out of people, extracting money. And if he's coming to New York, it may be to try to reclaim his business. I don't know, and go down
uh,
to his elevator again, so people will respect him. But I think that we're dealing with the wrong problem, as if he were rational, and what he was doing had some rationality to it. I don't understand that, and maybe that's my problem. So I will listen. But that's where I'm coming from on dealing with what
uh,
he was doing.
um, let me jump in. Thanks, Carolyn. Did Carolyn leave? No, she's still
No.
there. You moved around on the on the screen. So I have to disagree with you about Trump being a puppet. Um, and you're absolutely right, he's not rational, but there is a rational way, I think, or if that's what I want to say, to understand him, at least to a certain degree. He is a narcissist, a very, very extreme narcissist. He is very insecure and he needs to fill a hole. He has a hole that he constantly needs to fill. And an example of the need to have that hole filled is the 3 hour uh, meeting he had where people are praising him. And heads of governments realize that he has this hole because they come now and they stroke him and they praise him. Because that's one of the ways that you get on. It's not really his good side because there's not such thing. It's just a way to deal with him without him being angry at you. Because if you don't fill that hole to some degree, he's going to lash back out at you. there's no one can be loyal enough because you can be like super loyal to him until you stop shoveling something into that hole. He'll keep you around. He likes to keep people in his orbit. And when they start to shovel stuff back into the hole, they can come back into the fold. He likes to use you to his advantage. Um, he wants to control everything, as authoritarians generally want to do. So that's why he's attacking everything. And I think Jim is correct when he comes to normalizing the use of troops, because he realizes, I think, or people around him might have told him that at some point, and when I say people around him, I'm talking about uh, like Miller. I can't remember his first name for some reason right now. Um, I've talked to him, and he knows that at some point there's going to be a somewhat of an uprising of some type. People are going to rise up, and he's going to want to use the military to try to crush people. So he's trying to normalize that. Now, I don't think that all the policies are his. I don't think he's necessary. He's a kind of genius in the way that he's been able to use the politics of our country. There was a movement looking for a leader, and he was a leader looking for a movement, and he found that movement, the MAGA movement, and he built that, and he's leading it. So, Ken, when you said we'd get JD Vance, that's true, but JD Vance is not Trump, and by that I mean he can't command the allegiance of this coalition in the same way as Trump can, because Trump is a singular personality, a singular person. He's able to do things that most people can't do and still command respect from a large group of people. And the reason that Republicans, a lot of them, don't stand up to him is because they want to be in power and they want to stay in power. And they believe, and to what degree this is true, I don't know, but they believe that if they go against him, and I think depending on what race it is true, and other races it's not, they will lose and they won't be in power won't be in power anymore. He's been able to capture the Republican Party almost fully, and he swiped away um, really the Democrats. So the status quo, the ruling class, or the status quo, is he just kind of swiped them away, and is trying to rebuild itself. But I think he's far from a puppet. People are using him to get things that they want. So if that's what you mean by being a puppet, sure, you know. But as far as like pulling his strings, you can pull them emotionally because of that hole. But at the end of the day, the hole, that narcissism, is what motivates him the most.
Yeah, and he and and it's what's amazing. Let me just share something with you guys from the Washington Post. This is an article, dealing with the MAGA movement. And what I found interesting about it is, it's sort of like a political topology. And so what they define the MAGA movement is, this one part of it is MAGA populists, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, it's interesting to watch Marjorie Taylor Greene these days because she's rebelling from the MAGA line. I mean, she sort of has come out against the policy, basically letting Israel do what the hell they want. And it's very interesting to watch what's going on with her. But Bannon, of course, is their brilliant Machiavelli. And Vance, there's a great article in Politico about him in the Marine Corps. It's a very good article. I recommend, Michael, if you've never seen it, I really recommend it. It's very interesting because it talks about his voyage to politically become what he is. And he was certainly very much the disillusioned Marine Corps veteran when he deroached back to the States after he served as the Marines. So they define it, one, as this populist impulse. Now, all of us who are students of populism in America know that populism is a very powerful American political strand, right-wing populism, left-wing populism. Going back to after Reconstruction with Thomas Watson, the populist movement, which was a kind of reaction to Reconstruction, and that got defeated basically for a lot of reasons, including white racism. But populism is an interesting factor, and of course, the most important populist in the '60s was Governor Wallace of. And then remember, later in his life, he apologized for everything he'd done. So anyway, so that's one thing. And then they talk about how over half the Republicans support deporting all legal immigrants. Okay, so that's something that in the MAGA base is sort of very strong. Then you have traditional Republicans. Now, it's hard to evaluate them these days. John Thune, Brian Kemp, Lindsey Graham, Glenn Youngkin. Um, how do you evaluate these guys because they are intimidated by Trump because he can primary them. He threatens to primary them if they oppose him. But that's one. And Thune, of course, is leaving. I think Thune's from North Carolina. Is that not true, Michael?
No, no, he's somewhere in the Midwest. I can't remember where,
Midwest.
but
But
North
I know
Carolina.
that who's the guy? There was a senator from North Carolina who's retired.
Tillis, I think it's Tillis.
Tillis, and
Yeah.
I would put him in this category.
That picture of Graham, Lindsey Graham, that's a hilarious. Look at that frown.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
it's funny.
Well, it's funny. We interviewed recently his nephew, David Graham, who teaches at Duke, and he did a very, as politically, of course, very different than Lindsay, but very nice guy. He did a book on Project 2025. So here, and there's another issue. They think that the tariff issue will help the U.S. economy. Now we can talk about that because I, of course, do not agree with that at all. And then the issue of small government conservatives and fiscal hawks. Now, the only one really in here that I would actually, and Julie, you can comment about this because you live in Florida. Rand Paul's the only one who's consistent in this category here. Ted Cruz and Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is trying to run for president, and Ted Cruz, I guess, is trying to run for president. But I think DeSantis is definitely going to announce if Trump does not, get over and usurp the amendments of the Constitution to prevent a president from serving only 2 terms. And then you have this question of Ukraine. Now, here's where I disagree with people on the left. I disagree with them on the question of Ukraine. I do think that it was an example of Russian imperialism invading, but we have disputes. But you can see that here on the MAGA movement, half of them oppose sending military aid to Ukraine for a lot of very rational reasons. Now, here you got the religious right. Ralph Reed, a very influential and important figure, Mike Johnson, James Langford, Marjorie Danen-Felser, all these people, the religious right is part of this. And that, of course, gets into the question of support of Israel because you get this Christian Zionist impulse, which is very important politically. And then you get this issue of anti-abortion laws. And I don't think most of us here are, in the camp of being against abortion. But this issue of Trump trying to leave it to the states, that's been one of their party lines for quite a while. Then you have the question of same-sex marriage. Now, again, that is a cultural issue. It's like this issue we're going to have debating this person in Minneapolis, a trans person. I'm sure that they're going to make a big deal about this in terms of the culture wars. But the issue of same-sex marriage, they're going to try to retract that. Then the tech right, David Sachs, Mark Andreessen. That's an interesting question, too, how essentially all the big mogul tech companies have essentially joined forces with Trump, except, of course, you have Elon Musk breaking ranks to some extent and then threatening to start a third party. And here you have this issue of question of AI regulation, backing less AI regulation. Now, that to me is a problem for the Republican Party because AI is going to diminish jobs, not increase jobs, because who can actually work in AI? You have to have a specialist skill to work in AI, and AI is going to basically, that's one of the big weaknesses of all their reindustrialization plans. They're not really thinking this through carefully. And then you have Robert Kennedy. Now, Robert Kennedy Jr. is to me, and Tulsi Gabbard, I mean, we can talk about Tulsi, but Robert Kennedy Jr. to me is like, look at what just happened today with the CDC head. They want to restrict vaccines. I mean, I am not an anti-vaxxer, and so Robert Kennedy to me is like a retrograde idiot, frankly. Um, and here's this guy who was selling heroin at Harvard. That's how he was making extra money. But that's just a topology of the right. And Jim McFadden, you just joined. Jim, I know you have a different opinion about all this stuff than a lot of us do. What do you think about all this? And Danny Ruiz and Amy and Joan, please chime in if you want. Go on, Jim.
Wow. I missed the first part, so all I'm hearing is like, what is Trump at this point? And so I have some opinions, like everybody does, so I'll offer a few of them. Um, I think the first thing I think to understand is that, like all past presidents, Trump is not in charge. He's a figurehead at the head of a bureaucracy. And the chaos he's creating is a product of chaos within the ruling class. That the ruling class has disagreements. They have disagreements over where the next war should be. There's no disagreement, I think, that we need to be at war to keep the military industrial complex going. But where should that war be? Should it be in Ukraine as a continuing losing project? Should it be in the Middle East, or do we have to take it to China? And this has been, I think, a disagreement within the ruling class since going way back to Obama talking about the Asian pivot. So and I think within that, so there's this kind of also struggle on the economic front between a U.S. first, which is what Trump represents, or a globalist perspective. So it's more of the global ruling class, which has been the perspective of Clinton and Obama and the Democrats for a while. So I think, and then throw into all that mix is that you also have the crazy neocons, the neocon Zionists who have this additional um, drive to dominate and to maintain Israel as one of our fronts in that domination. But the main uh, 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 points of those dominations are first to get Russia, which is what Ukraine was an attempt at, and that animosity toward Russia goes back to the Brits and even before that, I think. There's books written on that, like creating Russophobia, and but also the ruling classes understands that China is now the primary economic power in the world, and so they're trying to figure out some way that they can continue their domination of China, and at the moment there doesn't seem to be any way without a war that domination can be enforced. So I think there's this kind of big struggle. So how does Trump fit into all that? Well, I think then you look at the presidents for the last 25 years, 50 years, probably, going back to Reagan. Reagan was kind of a figurehead. He was an actor, and he acted well, but he's surrounded by the ruling class, deep state operatives that basically ran his presidency. In fact, he clearly ran it at the end when when his Alzheimer's showed up. Bush was a product. Bush one was a product of that deep state. He came right out of the CIA. Right after World War II, he was integrated in the CIA. Clinton had his own ties into the deep state and basically threw the Democratic Party in with going, dumping the working class under the bus and going with where the money is, the corporate money. And Bush two, I think, was sort of came out of that same mindset. And Trump and Clinton have been kind of in the 2016. I think Clinton was the obvious pick of the deep state, but uh, um, I think people were getting upset with the endless wars, and Trump kind of offered some kind of alternative and snuck in there, and then everything was done to try to undermine him. Why do you want like somebody? Why was Trump actually acceptable? Why was he allowed to be, not just because he that was thought he was going to be a weak candidate against Clinton, but he's the kind of person that actually can be manipulated because he's ignorant. He's knows very little about the world, and that ignorance can be used against him to basically get him to do something. He holds a cult. He has a cult following that makes him keeps even when he does something completely bizarre, it keeps a large group of the population backing him. It's just like you said, he could walk down Main Street in New York and shoot somebody, and people would still love him. So he's a weird kind of guy, with he's got ADHD. He's ruthless, and because of his ignorance, I think he's easily manipulated. So we get this really bizarre situation of chaos, and chaos is something that seems like the empire wants right now. Empire, we create chaos in the world. We're allowing it to happen in the Middle East, where we did it in Ukraine. We're sending gunboats to Venezuela. And I think that's because chaos is kind of the only way that the empire can keep a grip on power at this point. And so we're gonna and if that continues, the actions I think by the U.S. are going to get more and more look like terrorist actions. I mean, clearly what's going on in Gaza is a terrorist action by the U.S. and Israel. And I think we're going to see that everywhere. We're going to see that in Ukraine once the Russians have won. We're going to be running terrorist operations to try to harass them. And I think we'll see something like that elsewhere in the world. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
All right, Danny, you unmuted. Come on, you
Yeah,
have some opinions, Danny.
yeah, just to chime in, thanks everybody getting on the call tonight. And I pretty much agree with everything James says. Um, I think Trump is the elite's pick. Uh, at this point, it seems like the Democrats, at least the leadership, it's almost like they're working for Trump the way that they fumbled this last election. Um, and like let's say something like the neocons, which Trump was sort of distancing himself from, but with the actions of Israel and Iran and stuff, he's almost become one of them. It's like that's just one of the many faces of the two-headed snake that's up there, And I, at least from my perspective, it just looks like for some of his more libertarian-leaning supporters, there's been a lot of broken promises, you know. Um, Taking a stake in a losing company like Intel, it's a little step towards fascism of the merging of the corporate and government state, and then I think at the end of the day, it's what this one gentleman said on the internet that Vance is the payload. Trump is just here front running it. So you have these tech oligarchs with these multi-trillion-dollar companies that never existed before until we created the money supply for those types of valuations to happen. A lot of people forget that from March to July of 2020, when Trump was president, M0 money supply doubled, M2 money supply increased by 30%. CPI usually lags that by 18 months. So all that inflation we saw under Biden, it was really was caused by Trump. And the Democrats won't mention that because, everybody profits from it. So they're all there on the back end. Everybody's getting rich. And it's just a system that is eventually, unless we correct it, but I don't see it with these two parties. And I don't trust Elon with a third party. And everybody just prepare accordingly and just continue to have a grassroots type of effort with your friends, family, local community, but prioritize taking care of yourself for what may come, This whole push towards blockchain, distributed ledger money, which, Bitcoin is really cool. I like Bitcoin. But once you start putting the government money on a ledger, they'll be able to freeze your money. They'll be able to see what you're doing with it. Privacy goes away. When you combine that with AI and them just being able to put everyone into like just a giant surveillance cage, it just doesn't bode well, And all this stuff of like the flag burning, now going to be a crime that you get 1 year. It's just, I don't know. It's been a bad couple of weeks for them, I would think. But some people really just cheer that stuff on, but they're just ignorant. I don't think they know history. So
You gonna jump in there, Michael?
Yeah, because I need to go in a few minutes to go eat. So it's a couple of things. One, when I hear some of the analysis, I feel like you think it's the same period like when his first when he was first president, his first term. And this is not that. This is different. This is different. Um, Also, I don't think you recognize, and I think honestly, I'm just going to say, I think black people did. I think black people do recognize Trump and his people, because we've had to deal with people like him from the beginning. And he is those people. The most of the ruling class was not those people. Everything else you all were saying about the ruling class, all that's true. But that's not who these people are. They're different people. And if we don't recognize them for who they are, the things that Carolyn, yes, is upset about will become like entrenched in our country. Um, the deep state, yes, there is a deep state, and they controlled the presidents. They were puppets to one degree or another. But Trump has brought all his own people in now. They're people that just should not be running shit, that are talking to him and telling him what to do. They shouldn't be running anything, and they are. Um, this is a different group, and I think people need to understand this is a different group. Um, yeah, the first Trump term, I would agree with what you said, James. And Danny, some of what you said, I'm not sure I understand, to be honest with you, but yes. But this time, none of the ruling class would be trying to do some of the things that Trump is doing. They would have done it to a degree, but they would have stopped at a line. There wouldn't be National Guard troops trying to be sent to every city. That wouldn't have happened. You wouldn't have people who are just basically Ku Klux Klan members, clearly in the government. That wouldn't have happened. No one would have released the people who tried to overturn the government on January 6th. I mean, this is a different type person. And I think it's important to understand that. That's all I'm saying. And lastly, because he's different, he's a singular guy. So this coalition he has pulled together, if will fall apart, I think, once he's gone. Not totally, but the Republicans that won't stand against him, the reason is because his base is strong enough to keep them in line. There's not ever been a president who had a base as strong as Trump's. He could, like he said, he could do anything. You tell me a president who could do anything, and the people just stay with him. Anything. And that's not been. So, and one thing that has to do with this is the demographic change in this nation and the economics of poor white people feeling super insecure and wanting to hold on to identity rather than looking at the true economic reasons why they feel the way they do. And Trump is speaking to that in a way that nobody else has been able to. That's a very, very important part here. And then the Christian right that Jim talked about, the Zionists, they think the heaven's coming as soon as all those Jews go back to Israel and Jesus comes back. And I'm a Christian, so I'm not trying to put Christianity down. They see Trump as part of that vehicle to make that happen. There are some very serious things that are very different for this guy, and I think we need to look at those things.
Very good,
So
Michael. And it's great to hear you. Please join us again. It's always fun to hear, or fun. It's always great to hear your opinions about stuff. Do come back, and it's great to see you. Good luck with being the executive director of Veterans for Peace. Take it easy. Anyway,
take care.
yeah, take it easy. Amy and Joan, you didn't chime in, and what do you guys think about all this? And Julie, please just jump in again. Yeah, go on, Amy.
I joined late with work stuff being crazy, but what I've heard so far is very interesting. I think we do have a lot of people right now in the White House who have no business being there. And I think some really good points have been made as far as I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback on my phone and it's making me a little crazy, so it's hard to talk. But I do feel like a lot of the topics have been very interesting and the opinions interesting as well. But we very much have a lot of people that should not be in office right now. And as you know, some of the things that are happening, I think it's part of trying to push the agenda of Project 2025.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, Joan, we're probably getting the feeds from different people. Yeah, Joan, you were going to jump in here?
Yeah, oh, thank you. I know I'm late. Sorry. I agree with what a lot of what Michael and what James said. But if you go back and this is the decline of the empire here. This is if you go back. Tell me, I can't even think back when there was a president that did anything for the people. I mean, the people have been forgotten for all these years. Go all the way back. And then when they moved all the manufacturing and all out and all, and then all those people in the Midwest, which are basically a lot of his backing there, they saw that people were marching for the black rights and for immigrants and all, and they said, "Oh, we don't have our jobs now; we're getting left behind." And they resented all that. This is all resentment. It's all resentment. That's what his fuel is, resentment. He resents everything that anybody says, and everything that anybody says is wrong, it's not right. He's going back to the age of the king, of the empress, and we know what happened to them. So, but you got to get where the people take over. I mean, there's too much people that have. We have more food, more housing, more health care, more everything, but we have people living in the street that are hungry and that don't have health care and all. What does that say? And I'm not saying it's just this country. It's a lot of it is in other countries too, but a lot of other countries have had ways where they don't have a lot of that too. They've found ways where they can where people aren't sleeping in the streets and all. But in this, we don't do anything for the people. If the people don't take over, he he's going to make this country so bad that I don't know where we're going to go. Wait till the National Guard starts shooting people in the streets. And
Right.
it's really bad.
Well, I just wanted to share. This is a piece that appeared in the Times today. Basically, Ezra Klein does a show. I'm not going to play the show, but the gist of it is that basically Trump's building a paramilitary force. And we have this issue that they're trying to set up a base near Chicago so he could, use it for ICE operations, tripling ICE's budget, expanding all these different detention camps around the United States. And he interviews Radley Balko, who did a book called The Rise of the Warrior Cop, the militarization of America's police forces. It might be somebody I'll try to get to come on and join us at some point. What I am reminded about is a good friend of mine who is now passed. He was the official historian at the U.S. Holocaust Museum. His name was Jeffrey Megery. And Jeffrey came out with a whole series of volumes that was quite stunning to read. It was essentially an encyclopedia of concentration camps built in Germany from the rise of Hitler on. And it was quite amazing to see the breadth and scope of what occurs after Hitler takes power in 1933. And I don't trust anything with these setups of these camps that they're setting up. They've openly said that they'd like to apply this to Americans. And so, what I find particularly important is to oppose completely these deportation policies of Trump, because it's sort of like what that famous quote about if they came for me, I did nothing. I think there was um, there was a German Catholic, excuse me, Protestant leader who had been a U-boat captain or U-boat officer during the First World War, and he basically was put in. I think he was put in a concentration camp by Hitler. I forget if he survived the war or not, but you know what I'm talking.
Martin Niemöller.
Right, Niemöller, right. And so, that type of approach to me is where these kind of things have to be completely opposed. Now, earlier, the issue of political economy was raised, and here's another little article here. This is on this whole question of AI. Hopefully it didn't come in. Oh, here it is. Okay. So this is interesting because I don't pretend to understand all this, admittedly, but they are referring to the question of how they're dealing with AI chips. And I believe earlier Danny raised this question about Intel. And this is an article by a former NSC official who is now employed in the private sector, Chris McGuire and Oren Cass. And they were talking about the question of how do we deal with the issue of AI opposed to China. And they're talking about the decision to ban AI chip exports to China. The U.S. share of AI computing power rose from 51 to 74%, while China's plummeted down from 33 to 14%. Now, the issue of going into the Chinese market is still very important. Now, what has Trump decided to do? He has announced an agreement under which AI chip companies will pay a 15% tax on their China revenue, and the Commerce Department has already begun issuing licenses for export. Now, this is a historically bad deal, according to them. China's greatest weakness in the AI race is in hardware. In every other element, China closely rivals or even surpasses the United States. And China has world-class engineering talent and 4 times as many people, leading Chinese AI models that are technically sophisticated. And I see these kids all the time at Columbia, really bright, motivated, young people. The United States banned China from purchasing not only chips, but also key chip-making equipment, leaving China's semiconductor ecosystem 10 to 15 years behind us. This year, China will make about 200,000 AI chips, equivalent to 1 to 2% of estimated U.S. production. So the leading Chinese chip today is almost 5 times less powerful and less reliable than Americans. However, the decision that's being made here, from the point of view of this question of AI vis-a-vis both countries, is one which can actually counter react to this advantage that the United States has in AI. And I'm wondering if people think about this. The NVIDIA sold 17 billion worth of AI chips to China. By comparison, Morgan Stanley recognized that the efficiency gains resulting from AI could add $16 trillion to the value of the Standard & Poor 500. If the United States has a big lead over China, it will capture nearly all its value. If it does not, China and the United States will divide up the pie. So the question about these kind of issues, which again are complicated issues for the public to deal with, go on, Jim. Jump in there, Jim.
So, I've been looking at AI for some time, and mostly I've been wondering why so much hype, being thrown into this. And to me, it looks like that, first of all, if you go and do some tests, as a scientist, asking AI to solve some simple kinds of problems, it's been wrong almost every time I've asked it to do some kind of problem like that. So I don't have a lot of faith in it. It's and so I'm beginning to think is being a bubble. And I read an article today on Naked Capitalism where some of the bubble aspects were discussed, and I want to read a sentence from that article. It says, so they're building all these AI chips, and it says they capitalize those expenses and spread the write-off over several years. In fact, they spread the write-off over up to 7 years. And so a chip that becomes obsolete in 2 years is being depreciated by some of the biggest hyperscalers to 5, 6, 7 years. And that creates a huge boost in corporate earnings during the tech build out booms like the one we're seeing now. And this is something that happened around the 2001 dot-com boom too. You create this bubble because using ways that you can write off things. So it looks like there's this huge return, But, when you're buying something and throwing it away in 2 years, but you're writing it off over 7, you're creating this false sense of gain. And all of the Magnificent Seven, and I assume most people know what the Magnificent Seven is, all these high-tech companies like Google and Alphabet and Microsoft and stuff that are the ones that have making the biggest profits right now. They're really growing off all this investment money coming in that's scaling up and building these giant AI servers that are going to be obsolete in a few years. So it's kind of a weird sort of thing. There's just everybody's seeing, oh, is this growth potential? Let's get in on it. But it looks to me like just a giant bubble that is probably going to pop in the next couple of years.
Interesting, interesting. Does anybody else have comments about this AI issue? Go on, Julian.
Yeah, I want to confirm, or rather agree with Jim's comments. My daughter works as an ML computer scientist, and it definitely got some useful applications. Its most useful thing is basically to scan data that is onerous for people to do. But I mean, as you saw from, well, not you saw, but I think it's well known that about half of the opinions and information in most like large language models are actually from Reddit. So people talking about stuff, and some of the stuff is, basically off center. So, we have a severe issue with quality control. And of course, I've seen the hallucinations in machine learning. We found in academia that machine learning is reasonably good at producing, let's say, a C+ paper. But the flourish of the language, I mean, it's really, really imprecise when it writes. And so if you're trying to do a social scientific test, it doesn't even show up well. There was a parody of machine learning in the most recent episode of South Park that's worth looking at, where the characters in South Park get ChatGPT to provide them a business model.
Oh, great to bring that up, by the way, South Park. Go on.
Yeah, and it turns into a giant disaster for everybody. Basically, South Park, it has got all the buzzwords, zero content, and one of the characters basically shuttered his business because of AI's bad advice. So, I mean, obviously, South Park's been having fun with ChatGPT. They had, I think 2 years ago, they had an episode entirely written by ChatGPT, and it was an absolutely hilariously stupid episode to watch. So yeah, there's a lot of hype out there. I agree with Jim that people are pushing this for obviously, if not government subsidies, then government tax breaks. But it's, we've had enough time now to see what problems it can solve, and it's very, very good at scanning large amounts of data to look for something like facial recognition or whatever, but it's definitely not a formula for thinking.
Yeah, someone was chiming in. It's good for translating. Danny, you were going to jump in with some opinion about this?
I think something that we have to consider when we're talking about bubbles is because we look at valuations, and like I think there's like a record of $7 trillion or something like that sitting in money market funds. So it's like you have a world awash in money, and it's like everybody just funnels it into the next big thing. So look at all the recent IPOs that have come out from like different companies like Figma. You had this other one called Bullish. You had the stable coin issuer called Circle. It's like we're back in the .com era, and it's not exclusive to just AI. Like basically everything is up. So you have like even just like your main indexes. Look at the S&P 500. Look at the price of gold. Look at Bitcoin. All those things are at all-time highs. And when you consider that they're going to start easing more with these criminal referrals for the Federal Reserve members, so they can basically bullying them into lowering interest rates. Like when I know somebody had brought up earlier the collapse of the Roman Empire, when you read into that, there's two factors of why they collapsed. It was the threat of their empire, like they just couldn't afford managing such a wide operation, and then it was monetary debasement was the second thing. And are we finally coming around that final turn with regards to the monetary issue? It's been so long that we were off the gold standard. We're at a $37 trillion national debt. Half of all tax collection just goes to paying off the interest on the national debt. Like, at what point don't the numbers make sense anymore? And are these valuations for this type of stuff just an indication that, hey, our money's just losing value? Because in any sort of technology that does change the world, that takes decades to become adopted, you do have bubbles in these things. So, like, let's say like the dot-com bubble, or in the late 1990s, you had like the classic case of Amazon.com right there next to Pets.com, and like they all came almost back down to zero. A lot of them died, but the ones that were actually valid are now these multi-trillion-dollar tech giants. So eventually that stuff will continue occurring. And like, let's say the financial sector and the computer tech world, which now the trigger word happens to be AI, like that'll continue to happen. But what portion of that is the monetary debasement? And since we know that so many politicians, not just Donald Trump, but they have so much money tied to these financial markets, currency debasement is an awesome thing for them because they just get richer and richer and richer. So like, what portion of the conversation is that? And that's something that we really need to think of, because when you're looking at the prices of things, you need to look at that price adjusted for money supply growth. So like, if we hadn't printed all that money, would these things be at this price? Probably not. We never had $2 or $3 trillion companies before COVID, before we doubled base money.
Great point,
So
Danny. Great
to me,
points.
I think that's the main driver of a lot of stuff. I'm from a strict monetary perspective that, hey, like I'm not making it up when the Federal Reserve, Milton Friedman won his Nobel Prize for explaining how the Federal Reserve caused the Great Depression. And then at his 90th birthday, Ben Bernanke apologized to him on behalf of the Federal Reserve for causing the Great Depression. They promised that they would never let it happen again. And the reason they said that it happened because they didn't bail out the banks in 1929, and that's what caused the deflation. Right. So that when 2008 came around, that's why they bailed everybody out. But Milton Friedman wasn't right. He was wrong. They gave him the award because they wanted to do what he said. It was Ludwig von Mises that was correct. It was the inception of the Federal Reserve in 1913, alongside the IRS and the income tax, that created the roaring 20s bubble, that without the bubble, there wouldn't have been any crash. And in the 30s, that's when they confiscated gold. We didn't have gold and gold coins until the 70s, when they demonetized gold. And then since then, we don't even have money. We just have paper currency. And that's why the valuations of all these things are crazy. Think about it. Should NVIDIA be a $4 trillion company? Like, that's unheard of. 4 trillion? Now Microsoft too? Like, when do they not mean anything? At what point? And most people, they just don't think about it like that. So like,
no, those are good points.
There's a good Twitter feed. It's a person, his name is Value Seeker. And what he does is he looks at stocks, he looks at commodities as well, based off of M2 money supply growth. So if you pull up the NASDAQ 100, we're way higher than what we were in the dot-com era. Like, we've surpassed that a long time ago. But if you adjust it for the M2 money supply, we are back exactly at the peak of 99, 2000, that dot-com bubble right now.
Interesting. And it's great to bring up these political economy issues, because I remember I've been looking, for example, at this whole issue of what Trump is to gain by knocking the interest rates down to 1%. Because I've been sort of thinking it's essentially interrelated to further reinforcing the Republican Party in the economy being stimulated in the quarters leading up to the midterms. Look, we know that they're engaging in gerrymandering. We know that they're out to knock out the Voting Rights Act with this lawsuit that's going up into the Supreme Court. And so there's all these other factors. And of course, he has, as Michael was saying earlier, these people that are being placed in these positions, like this woman who was a active January 6th, and the denier of the election being lost to Donald Trump, and she's now in charge of voting in the Homeland Security. But go on, Julian, and then I wanted to ask Julie some questions about Florida. Go on, Julian.
I want to reflect on some of the things that Danny mentioned. I found it peculiar because I've been following Russia on YouTube since before the war. I had an instinct that a conflict was going to break out. And so a year and a half before the conflict, and it was like 2020, 2021, I was looking at the lifestyle YouTube channels of people describing what it was like to travel across Russia, describing the cities, their personal lives. What I found interesting is that the inflation caused in Russia by the printing of money now to get soldiers to fight on the front is very similar to the inflation that you have in the US and many Western countries, because Russia didn't print money during COVID and the West did. So by printing all that money, we inflicted a damage on ourselves equivalent to the sanctions effects that we've put on Russia. I do want to make one, again, I did a blurb at the beginning of this talk about, I saw the treatment of Reagan in the 70s and even the early 80s. And so I'm very, very wary to condemn Trump's economic policies, because the big ones, which is, the ultimate goal of reindustrialization, which I don't expect to produce any returns for half a decade. So, I'm not watching job numbers. I'm not looking at immediate productivity, but I think it's very, very rational not to have a free trade agreement with a country whose leaders are constantly threatening to attack you, or whose whole philosophy is to destroy your Navy. I know the U.S. has distributional issues. I mean, that's uniquely American. Every single election is some sort of deep ideological fight, from different sides. But one of the reasons Trump is able to do what he does internationally and get away with it is everyone's intimidated by the U.S. And they're intimidated by the U.S. because of the enormous American economy. 25% of the world's GDP is American. Now, you might be right. It might be in 20% inflated by this artificial machine learning investment. But the nominal GDP of the US is how countries judge what the US can buy in the international market. So even if the Americans know it's some sort of temporary fiction based on a bubble, the rest of the world feels the impact of it as if it were real. It's the reason why the US is able to negotiate so easily with all its neighbors. I mean, Canada folded a couple of days ago. We took away our retaliatory tariffs. We're naked, right? That's how scared we are of them. And we went to Mexico to negotiate or join with them against the US in negotiating, and Mexico said no. I mean, the world is on the point of disintegration because the US is so wealthy. So so there I would disagree with Danny when I think of that. And here, I'm hearing some unnecessary historiography. There's a lot of on YouTube and TikTok. There's a lot of doomsayers who are looking forward to the collapse of the U.S., particularly people that support China, for example, or support Russia. The reality is Russia and China are on the verge of collapse. And so, referring to the Roman analogy, why did the Roman Empire collapse? Actually, I don't think it did. The Roman Empire transformed itself into a much higher productivity institution. There's one theory. I mean, this is something you could debate, but I heard from one scholar that Merovingian France had higher iron production than the entire Roman Empire. Certainly, the medieval peasant was a lot more efficient than the latifundia slave or the Roman peasant. So, how does that apply to the U.S.? I mean, it looks chaotic. It looks like you've got lots and lots of, billionaires on the verge of becoming trillionaires, which is a distributional issue. But the U.S. is nowhere near collapse. I mean, the U.S. is shockingly scary to the rest of the planet, and the evidence is that Trump is able to get almost any deal he wants with regard to tariffs. Thank you, Jim.
All right. Well, that's interesting because
If I can just chime in with my just one point.
yeah, hold on, hold on, Danny, just a second. What's interesting is when Julian raised that again in the midst of all this 250th anniversary of American Revolution, I'm thinking about how Edward Gibbon, of course, his classic work on the Roman Empire, which is published in 1776, argues that Christianity is responsible for the defeat of the Roman Empire. But go on, Danny.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that the US is going to collapse. I'm just the monetary system will collapse and they're going to change it into something. So is that what we see going on with these stable coin bills and things like that? What we do see is an increase in costs over like year over year. So like whether it's rentals, the price of like a median house versus median income, like investments, and people are going to be priced out. Your average young person can't buy as many S&P 500 shares or single family homes as like their prior generations. So that's the collapse that I'm talking about. But it's a transition to the power elites or whoever is going to continue running the world. They're not going to crash our system here, like the U.S., because they won't be able to live here. So they're going to keep it going. But like when you cook crabs, you can't put them into boiling water, but you can put them into room temperature water and bring it to a boil, and they won't like fight against it. So there's a distinction there that I think that the empire is going to continue. But remember, let's say if the Roman Empire collapsed, it took hundreds of years for it to collapse. It wasn't overnight. It was something. And I think the numbers are just in our favor, where it's like, hey, look, $37 trillion national debt. And that's the main reason that Elon Musk got into the spat with Trump, is because, hey, Doge is not going to be able to rein in all that spending. So is AI's productivity gonna is gonna deflate the money supply growth so that we don't see costs rise? I think that's what Trump and his team are betting on, but I don't think they could pull it off.
Yeah, go on. Julian, hold tight. Julie, you're going to jump in. Go on, Julie.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the question that I have is when you talk about the perception on the world stage and, how you were making comments about how you hesitate to judge because the tariffs will reindustrialize the United States. I guess my curiosity is it's pretty obvious, and Jim, you made reference to this when you were talking about the article, that when they bring these jobs back, the intention is not to create human jobs. They're going to create AI jobs, they're going to create robotic jobs, and that's just going to continue to centralize wealth, which goes to what Danny's saying. You have, this wealth consolidation in this 1%. Elon Musk has already been demoing agricultural robots that are able to pick, fruit and vegetables, not nearly as efficiently as the immigrant workers were. But think about, when you have the auto worker that came out on tariff day and was cheering for the auto jobs that are going to be coming back to America, when they find out that they're not going to get their jobs back and they're just going to be replaced by robots, or they're going to be working alongside robots, and all those job gains that they were counting on don't actually come to fruition, how is that benefiting the U.S. economy?
Absolutely. Now, I want to ask you, Julie. Hold on, Julie. I want to ask you, Julie, if you could comment about what's going on in Florida. What's the latest in terms of what's going on in Florida?
Well, actually, Danny's in Florida with me. He's actually in Miami, so he can speak as well as I can. But what's going on in Florida is that you have some of these diehard, very conservatives. I actually just had a heated debate with my own uncle, who is a Cuban immigrant, and I was talking to him. He's very much a prepper. He's been preparing for doomsday for years, and I was having just what I thought was a civil conversation, and he got very upset with me out of nowhere and said, Trump is the only one. And I said, well, what about the moderate Republicans? They were doing a better job. If you want to talk about repairing this country, you have to meet in the middle. It can't always be about Project 2025. And, trying to reason with somebody on their own turf. And I mentioned to him, look, look at the website that's tracking the initiatives of Project 2025. And as a single mother, I find it terrifying that one of the initiatives that still hasn't been really brought up, but that certainly could be a problem in Florida, which is very pro-dad, is that custody should be reserved for parents who live in a two-parent household. And, personally, my ex-husband is remarried. So for me, that's obviously concerning that that's a dedicated part of Project 2025. And his response was, well, you should be afraid of the Democrats and, the communists in Cuba, they took the kids away from their parents and that's why we fled. And I'm like, yeah, but that's what the Republicans are talking about doing now. And he absolutely refuses to hear the fact that, this party is now openly talking about things that caused him to leave everything that he had but the clothes on his back and flee Castro. Leaving his parents behind because they were detained at the airport when he tried to leave with them. They sent him on the plane anyway with relatives and said, you need to get out. You're going to be broke, you're going to be penniless, but you're going to be free. And then he's wholeheartedly still supporting what this guy's doing, even though, like I said, it's stripping away rights. It should concern him that the military is being deployed on the streets and that, DeSantis is very gleefully following. But, we are seeing a few changes. Alligator Alcatraz was ordered to shut down within 60 days, and they're saying that it could be empty as soon as the end of this week. Where they're going to send these people is TBD. I don't think that they're going to be released. They're just going to be crammed into the Chrome Detention Center and other facilities that are already over capacity. While this all plays out, and I think it's a little bit disheartening for the people that actually support the immigrant communities, that the lawsuit that prevailed that got Alligator Alcatraz shut down was over environmental concerns with relation to things like the sewage caused by, and I'm not saying that the environment isn't an important issue, but the fact that there are all of these lawsuits about people, and children and lives that are being disrupted, and none of that has mattered, but what mattered was the environmental impact of the abuse that's being inflicted on these people in the middle of the Everglades. So somehow that's saying that the abuse is okay, but we can't have the sewage spill into the Everglades. And I support environmental causes. I volunteer for nonprofits dealing with the environment, so I'm not saying that it's not important, but it sends a very bizarre message that their lives are worth less with everything that's going on, and it's very disheartening. I mean, Danny, you live in Miami, which is a strange sort of red pocket in the middle of all the blue in South Florida. Do you see anything different than I'm seeing?
I see all spectrums all the time, and it's just like it's a melting pot. So I don't know what to say. I have diehard lawyer family members on both sides. I'm like sort of the only person that cares about the monetary portion of it. I think that's really the central piece to everything. But a lot of people are adamant about even like the way that it was deployed, the whole ICE, the new ICE operations and stuff like that. Most people know that, hey, they're not following the rules how it's supposed to be done, and that people that have been following the rules are being targeted, and it's just for optics and just for numbers and stuff like that. And it's a shame, but it's.
Well, I'm curious, Danny, in terms of Hispanic Americans, because look at what's going on. Like we know what the stats are. A lot of these guys that are being arrested and deported, they have no criminal records. They're just being arrested because they happen to be, they're trying to follow rules, and they're just being busted because they are Hispanic, or they're being busted because they're brown skin. I mean, this ridiculous bullshit going on. And I'm wondering how that's affecting people perceiving this, in particularly Cuban Americans or Venezuelan Americans or all the different potpourri you have down there from Latin America in Florida.
Cuban Americans are very different than any other Hispanic group in Florida. Danny, I don't know if you disagree with me on this, but there's bizarre perception.
It's like a mix. There's a mix. So like I'll have really liberal Cuban American family and friends. It's usually the younger generation, but then the older generation that fled communist Castro, and then they basically did everything by the book. But they're like, I think the assumption is that whoever's getting arrested now is not doing it by the book, and that's just the wrong assumption. So I think once I have talked to a number of people that are seeing the way it's done, and they disagree with it, and they're Trumpers, and like they still agree with him with a lot of the stuff, but they understand that that's being done wrong. Some of them think that, hey, look, it's sometimes it's going to get messy, but that's definitely shouldn't be the case when you're talking about people's livelihoods and people that are trying to do stuff by the book. We're all a nation of immigrants, so I think we should have more respect for them.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. It's to me, it's just disgraceful. Julian, I know you see Kenny and Jim. Julian, you just had a quick comeback on that.
Yeah, my quick comeback is I remember the late 1970s. You had those massive strikes and all the car manufacturers around Detroit shut down. And I wondered, where did those 50-year-old people go? I assume by now they're mostly dead. I think probably a percentage of them retooled and moved out and went somewhere else to get probably a lower paying job. I mean, than they were getting at General Motors. So it's certainly part of Trump's platform is promising disingenuously to get jobs back for non-college educated males. But I think it's fairly obvious that a lot of those jobs are going to get automated, and frankly, we want them. We want those jobs to be automated, and we want the pressure of a labor shortage to articulate the kind of problems that will have technical solutions. So for me, I mean, it's obviously contradictory. I mean, there are some dumb people that voted for Trump not knowing what was down the road, but I mean, overall, it's going to make America richer and stronger, and then pay off down the road. The reason I don't dislike billionaires is because they lose their money very, very quickly when the tech changes. So Elon Musk is on top right now. I think he's actually got a fair bit of speed in there. I think Jeff Bezos is probably a rent seeker, which means Amazon at some point is going to get beaten out by obviously there's entry costs, and that's if frankly I would do antitrust against Bezos.
That's of course why they were so palsy-walsy with Trump from the get-go. Anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, that's
all right.
That's my reaction
Jimmy,
to that.
Jim, go on, Jim.
This thread kind of veered off a little bit, so it kind of started off with talking about a collapse, and maybe people meant by collapse a coming recession. I'd say nothing's gonna happen fast because there's so much inertia in the economy, but the empire's in decline, and what we should be talking about is like why it's in decline. And if you look at capitalism in this country, there's levels of capitalism in small businesses that are kind of normal capitalism, but our biggest businesses have kind of veered off in other directions, or at least some of them have. And so profits are no longer being channeled back into better production, which is what China's been doing, and that's why China and even Russia can build some systems for way less than we can build them here, because there's so many layers of profit on top of it. And instead, those profits are being channeled into assets, and so we've created this huge asset bubble in the stock market, and we've created this huge asset bubble in property value. So properties are have just skyrocketed, and majority of people can no longer afford to buy housing, even when they have both work and decent jobs, so and this is all tied into the whole financialization that the US has gone through since basically the 80s, where there's been a whole change in the approach, where banks and in the stock market and stuff have high priority. So the bailouts, when we had the recession in 2008, which was caused by banking, who gets bailed out in that, the bankers, you could have it's really weird. The numbers are something on the order of $20 trillion bailout over the 5 years after 2008, um, which all tied down to these uh, derivatives, which were based on mortgages for people who really couldn't pay. But the mortgages at the bottom of that whole thing, those were about $2 trillion. So, you could have just paid off those mortgages entirely, and it would have been a lot cheaper than, continuing to bail out the banks because there was all these derivatives on derivatives and derivatives that were creating all this money bubble. And I think, until the U.S. comes to grips with its system, which doesn't go into productive value. If you can build a lot of weapons, but if you're going to blow them up, you really don't have anything at the end. So you can build all kinds of crap, but if you're just building weapon systems, so I think until that gets solved, the U.S. will just continue to fall behind. Whereas China's been very clever about how it's organized its economy so that it can deal with these kind of things with a banking system that's not about making bankers rich so they can buy yachts and stuff. So it's not about making the investor class in the banks rich so they can buy yachts or more houses or whatever. It's actually a lot of it ends up being those profits going plowed back into additional production value. And so I think until the U.S. deals with this, now seems to be talking about this. Hey, guy, we deindustrialized. That's a problem. I mean, he's correct there, but until you change the underlying system that drives investment, that's not gonna. You can't just magically wave your hands and say we're going to bring back those industries from our vassal states, and make those things here because you're not dealing with the fact that you got to pay insurance on a company, so it just costs more for that, or you have to pay higher salaries because housing is high. I mean, all these things add together, and it's all because of this wealth transfer, to the investor class. And until somebody deals with that, there's just no way we're just going to continue to remain in decline. Doesn't mean it couldn't be turned around. This country has vast wealth in food production and other resources, much like the Soviet Union. But if we continue to just always throw all those profits into the wealthy, it's just never going to change. So,
But before I go into Kenny, I just want to add that I'm emailing Adam Tooze. Now, Adam Tooze, as you know, some of you may know, he has done brilliant looks at these kind of issues. His last big book was on the recession of 2007 to 2009. And he's doing one now on climate change. And I gather he might be either thinking of leaving Columbia University because of all the bullshit for the past 2 years, or he's getting ready for a PR tour in his new book. But I'm going to definitely ask him to come and talk with us at some point. And I think these questions would be really interesting with someone like Adam to contemplate. Go on, Kenny.
Okay, just a quick thing for James, and then I wanted to ask Danny a more developed question. Did you say the Soviet Union?
I might have.
Okay,
But
then there
if
is
I
no
did, I
more.
meant Russia. If I did, I meant.
Okay, that's all.
That's all.
I wanted to ask Danny. I thought it was
Freudian
kind of
slip. Freudian slip. Go on.
well, Freudian or whoever. There must have been a Russian psychoanalyst that was comparable to Freud. Let's give him the name for the slip. But anyhow, Danny, I wanted to ask you.
Some of us non-radio personalities, get a little nervous when we're talking.
Right? No, it's okay.
And
I
so we
wanted.
make
I'm
those
so
kind of
behind on everything. I wanted to find out if maybe there was
Now,
a reestablished Soviet Union. I don't know. Because they made an agreement with certain territories around them, and that's the new Soviet Union.
By the way, I read a really good book on Russia recently called Creating Russophobia, and by Guy Matan. I strongly suggest it. It kind of goes back 1,000 years in history to develop all the anti-Russian tropes and prejudices
Yeah.
that have been building up. That the Brits perfected, and then and then the Americans are adopting. So it's
Right.
worth reading.
Yeah. What's it called? Say it again.
Creating Russophobia.
Russophobia. Yeah, I would. Yes, I probably can
The author
concur
is
with it.
a Swiss guy.
That's
So
okay. So let me get to this thing with Danny because we're going to be running out soon. I would say surprised that nobody noticed what I think is an obvious phenomena of a con game, where the implementation of a complex monetary system overload, bypassing all common sense or understanding and just flop it out there. All it's going to do is create a further separation of the haves from the have-nots. And then they did this a lot, and I thought it was really, and I'm not really a stickler on morality, but in America, it was immoral to create that. I think it might have happened mostly under Obama, this complex system of getting health insurance for old people. What a bunch of people read that kind of fine print anyhow, and then they give it to you, and there was a donut hole, and you got to get this to cover that, and that to cover this. And insurance companies always create the most ridiculous forms when you want to make a claim, that trying to stop you from successfully getting any compensation. So same thing with this. What the hell is Bitcoin? What the hell are you talking about? Crypto what? Who studied this? Who knows what you're talking about? It's worse than Latin. And they just throw this out there, and all that's going to do is make it easier for con men, or whatever phrase you want to use, for manipulators or entrepreneurs, or whatever name you want to give it, take advantage of the general public and suck more money out of the general public into the hands of a few people at the top who can manipulate these funds. And on the internet, that's all you got is these ads. How you can make money doing nothing. You can do it with stocks. You can do it with crypto. You can do it with tax liens on other properties that are going false. And then here's how we follow. We can, if you want to just do the simple thing, let's follow somebody in the Senate or the House who's making a fortune, see what they buy, we'll buy that. There's all kinds of things, that cons and everything aside from write a book, make a drawing, bang together a chair and sell it. Nothing practical. Call up, do babysitting, take a dog for a walk, do something useful. No, so it's all how to manipulate things. So that's my question, Danny. Do you see that the whole thing with the Bitcoin, whether you understand it or not, basically you're throwing in a case of confusion, and only a few people have any idea what it's about, and they're the ones who are going to make money, and it's just going to take advantage of the people who can't operate in that, don't know how to play that kind of 5-dimensional solitaire.
That's a great question. So, I don't know if you want me to answer that right now.
Yeah.
So
you don't have to give me an answer. You could research it, but what do you think about that?
The timeline of when Bitcoin was released was, if the Bitcoin white paper was around 2008, 2009, right at the time when, the banks were bailed out. If you look up one of the charts that everybody should have memorized is base money supply, M1, M2 money supply, because when you start to value everything in money supply growth, you sort of tend to understand why things are getting so expensive and why they're moving. I think one of the reasons Bitcoin was released, which everybody should pick up the book, it's called The Bitcoin Standard, where they discuss the gold standard, and they discuss why Bitcoin's an important thing, which Bitcoin is just an autonomous software. There's no offices, there's no president, and it just runs by itself. It's like a computer science breakthrough from that perspective, that the SEC, Security and Exchange Commission, this is bipartisan under Republicans and Democrats. They've already given Bitcoin commodity status, so they don't consider it an unregistered security. But when you look at the price of Bitcoin today and its market cap, it's $2 trillion. So that means it's sucked up $2 trillion worth of money printing. So part of the reason I think it was released was to sort of keep inflation at bay, because now it's something else that money gets to go into. but that's not our monetary system. And when you look at the genius bill of what Trump signed a couple weeks ago, um, they're talking about stable coins, which stable coins are not like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is proof of work. Uh, miners, China banned Bitcoin a couple years ago, so like they don't really like it, you know. But the stable coins, which are coins that are equivalent to dollars, they're regulated as banks. In order to issue a stable coin, you have to buy bonds. The largest stablecoin issuer in the world is called Tether. They issue the USDT stablecoin, which is US dollar Tether. They made more profit on their bond holdings last year than BlackRock did as a company. So that says something. And with the passing of these new bills, that's the direction that they're going to take us into, is this stablecoin world. They said that they're not going to let it be a central bank digital currency, which is basically would be like a Fed coin. Um,
Can I ask a real quick question? Why would somebody buy a stable coin backed by bonds? Why don't they just buy the bonds?
Agree.
Why have
Well,
a
just
middleman? Why have a middleman and
velocity of
they're taking
money.
a cut?
You can move that stable coin a lot quicker than you could your bonds, maybe. So, but they're gonna just incentivize everybody that way. So like I went to the Bitcoin 2022 conference, and applications like Cash App, PayPal, Robinhood, they're all gonna integrate all these wallets, and there's gonna be Euro stable coins. Tether, that company, they have their dollar stable coin, USDT. They have a stable coin that's backed by gold in a vault. So they basically resurrected the gold standard.
Right. But
And then
that's
they
what I
have
mean, Danny. You see that building behind Julian? You're talking about 5 floors above that. It's like, what's the bus driver going to do? What
what's
about
the
the
what?
nanny who goes across town? How are they going to deal with this chaos of confusion of new technology and considerations? It's a foreign language. It's a whole concept. In other words, you go to public school, and one of the things to make a consistency or a familiarity, a commonplace between all people is everybody goes to the same kind of a public school. So everybody's set in front of one of those daisy wooden desks and had a blackboard and a teacher who was bad and the substitutes and played dodgeball. So they had a common experience and learned geometry and right triangles and alphabetic tables based on the 10. Everybody grew up on a metric system of 10, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and the multiplication tables. And this is like, how do new maths, solve it backwards. And let's
They'll force
let's
you into
use
it.
this. It's just over everybody's head. And
Yeah,
new
but
They'll force you
products.
into it.
it's not over Trump's head. I mean, Danny,
No,
like,
no, come on, forget Trump. I'm
why does
talking
Trump?
about
No,
the
so Trump has
population.
actually got involved in the Bitcoin business. I'd like to
Okay,
know
hey,
what Danny
listen, I'll
thinks
tell you
about that.
what. I
Because
will
they're
donate,
guilty.
I will send a poison donut to Trump if that'll make you feel better. Okay? So what I'm saying is this is a crime against the population, saying, "Oh, you're too stupid to understand how to manipulate funds. You don't understand these esoteric concepts. So just be happy that we gave you a taco to eat and get back to work." It's just
All right.
creating a chaos of no knowledge of
All right. Before Danny answers that, Kenny, have you ever actually talked to guys who run derivative companies? I have. Derivative,
derivative. I worked
yeah,
with
guys
him.
who, well, guys who actually made a lot of money with derivatives. They're happy. They're happy that people don't understand that. But anyway, Danny, go on, Danny.
Yeah, yeah. No, I
So,
worked for a mortgage company, and just when it went bust, 2008, I could tell you stories about the things he was talking about and why it went bust and so forth.
Well,
We used to call it hot potato. Sell this mortgage to somebody quick before it gets called. So,
so
but I'm just saying it's similar to what they've done with the medical insurance. So, and they just pushed it to a point where people have been hustled into buying whatever they call it, special package, where you get to go to the gym and you get some free money back and you get some food and you got to go to the doctors that we tell you about and so forth, like Kaiser and so forth. The advanced plans, that's what they're called. And that was done because it created tremendous confusion on how can you handle a reasonable insurance for medical, little papers and names and, confusion. And that's what this is. This is like a magician. Let me distract your attention of bitcoins and gyros and kairos and this and gold points, and it's equivalent to a bond. What person knows what a goddamn bond is, or a state bond, or a government bond, or a Roth IRA? Who knows that? Who understands that? And
I don't think they care about those
especially people
people.
who are seniors.
I don't think they really care about them. Like
Nobody
that's the problem.
cares.
That's part of the problem. But like I think the final portion of the stable coin thing is that if you have to issue if you have to buy bonds in order to issue stable coins, then that means the government has a fresh new like set of buyers for their bonds. Bonds are the national debt. We got $37 trillion worth of it. The Federal Reserve is underwater like $1 trillion on their holdings ever since they started QE in 2008, quantitative easing. So they're not going to be buying as many bonds. So they need to create some new bond buyers. And like the Democrats and the Republicans are going to both be in on it because they need to kick the can down the road. They need to continue deficit spending, which when you monetize the debt, like what we did in QE, that's where you get inflation because you're increasing the money supply to buy bonds. And but the second part of that answer is like, I don't think they care about the average person. And like I think mostly everyone here has learned how to use Zelle on their phone apps. Most of the money supply is already digital. Like I think maybe cash is like 0.3% of the money supply. The rest of it is all digital. So this is just they're transferring us onto that. We couldn't hold a gold standard, we couldn't hold a silver standard, a paper standard, a base metal standard. So it's like we're not even going to be able to hold this digital standard. They're going to have to take us into a stable coin standard. And that's the only way to kick the can down the road. But they're gambling that the productivity from all this AI and robotics, which is going to lead to I think James was talking about functional unemployment, which is a good thing because people need to be thinking about bigger, more important problems so we can move humanity forward and stuff like that. It's going to be really unpredictable. It's going to be bad for a lot of people unless they really, really, really ramp up their research and their hard work. But I think the older folks, they're sort of screwed on this one because technology is just going to continue moving fast, and we know how it tends to leave them behind. But just everybody's got to get as acquainted as much with their phones and with applications and stuff like that because they don't care about you. So you gotta sort of just take care of yourself, And I think the bulletproof portfolio, like if you want to just like keep your money sort of safe, it's been like 33% S&P 500, 33% gold, 33% Bitcoin, and it's balanced out every January because that's what they're doing. So it's like you're basically copying their portfolio. So when you're copying everybody that's in Congress or like in the administration or Trump himself, you're not going to lose because they're not going to lose.
Just to repeat, that's very important. That's at least it's a stable datum. 33% S&P, 33% gold, and then 33% Bitcoin.
Yep. And if you would include cash and bonds to make it
And
5.
wait a minute, and then you left 1% left over because that only adds up to 99. I guess you give that to the church.
Yeah.
All right, Julie, you were going to jump in with something, Julie?
Yeah, just a brief reaction to Jim's discussion and description of the Chinese and Russian economies as somehow being more generally productive. China's stock market, has the purpose of moving money from the people's savings into projects that the government wants the people to pay for and doesn't want their banks to pay for. But it's done, unfairly, and there's no mechanism for uncovering the institutional economy of scale that corrupt enterprises get if they have a connection with the Communist Party. China's got huge numbers of ridiculous public projects. You already have high-speed train stations that have been shut down because there's no one there. The deficit in U.S. investment in transportation is a much smaller problem than the enormous waste of wealth that the Chinese government has done in the last 10 years as a part of the Belt and Road Initiative outside of China and the infrastructure building inside of China. China's not a model. I forget what the stats are, but they're ridiculous. Something like 50% of people whose household income or family wealth, not income, family wealth is over, I think it was like 3 million US in China, wants to leave. There is zero faith out by Chinese people of the Chinese system. There's no confidence, and that's the main reason why the renminbi can't become a currency for trade. The U.S. I mean, listening to your discussion, it's fairly sophisticated, and while Chinese might mimic that discussion, they know the terms. They don't have the institutions, to make it credible. As for the Russian economy, I mean, holy cow. I mean, it's much
But
worse.
before you go on to Russia, just as far as China goes, China does have high-speed trains. How many does the U.S. have?
You can't, no, sorry. The high-speed trains are wildly expensive for the average person in China. It's a propaganda piece for the China dream. There's a lot of speculation that it costs more than it contributes to the economy. Chinese people don't like China, which is I think a pretty good summation of how good China is at doing things. There are not that many Americans who want to go to China unless they're trying to set up a factory to export to the US. Chinese people don't want to be in China. Now,
I think you might have a little bias there. I mean, I know a lot of Chinese here who are here because they want to study, and some of our universities are still pretty good. But I don't think I know any of them except one. I had one postdoc who said he didn't want to go back because the pollution in Beijing was really bad. But other than that, I think a lot of the Chinese, have a great respect for their country, and the ones that I've talked to. So I'm a little surprised at those comments. And when I visited China, I didn't find any issue with the scientists that I met there, being critical like you are. So
no, I mean, obviously the elite will be privileged, and are not going to shirk that privilege. And life in the U.S. is obviously very competitive with very high levels of productivity. But most people in China are not scientists, and certainly the business people who've had to bribe to do what they need to get done for their family are not happy. I've been in China living with in-laws, and I mean, while some of those people are fairly well off and probably wouldn't want to move here in Canada because they have nice condos and those sorts of things, they won't buy Chinese, for example. One family had a kid and they spent a ridiculous amount of money making sure all their food, to the extent that they could afford it, came from outside of China. That's a really, really fundamental problem. They so I think the class of people you're speaking to, says a fair bit. Obviously, I don't want to say that Chinese scientists are not meritocratically selected, because obviously they're very smart. I have Chinese students, but if they're traveling outside, it's because the regime trusts them, because their priority is regime survival. And obviously there's big issues for the youth in China. Now, Russia is, it's an epic, colossal disaster. I mean, talking about a horrible Gini coefficient, the largest piece of real estate on the planet, where the bottom 60% are concentrated in crap housing from the 1950s. And if it wasn't for this war, we wouldn't have a dramatic shift of wealth from the Siloviki kleptocratic elite to the rural areas and to the some of the ethnic groups and to the poorer communities. There's nothing in Russia or China that the U.S. can learn anything from. I mean, in my opinion. Yeah, that's
All right. Well, we will now. Now, this is very good. We had this discussion here because now I'm going to sit there and put a Hadaka Jimi, which those of you who know judo, that's a chokehold on Aaron Glasserman, and have Aaron come and join us at some point, because Aaron just spent several months in Beijing. He's now at UPenn at a think tank down there. Aaron is a friend of mine who did a brilliant dissertation. He got a postdoc at Princeton and Harvard and has been going back and forth to China, the mainland, as by the way, Kenny has, because Kenny's been to the mainland. When's the last time you went to the mainland, Kenny?
December.
December, yeah. So Kenny goes often. And I know you have family, Julian, so it'd be very interesting to hear what Aaron has to say about China. I've been wanting to have him come and talk. Now, I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the issues that we haven't been really getting. And this is, I want to also bring up the Middle East. Now, this is from the Harvard Harris poll. Now, the reason I use the Harris poll, I remember I actually worked in the Harris poll system back in 1972. And I'll never forget that I worked on a Harris poll that had to do with attitudes about American foreign policy in 1972 among the American population. And what a difference it is now to look at how these polls are. Because you still saw, for example, the impact of the greatest generation. All these people who had fought in World War II, they were open-minded about having America have relations with the rest of the world. It's quite amazing to see how distinctive these trends are. But let's just look at what this is the Harvard poll as of this month in August. So 40% say the country's on the right track. 38% of voters say the economy is on the right track. Voters
Wait, the blue is Dems and the red is Republican?
Right track, wrong track. We'll get to that. That's red is the wrong track. Blue is the right track. So you can see that most Americans think it's on the wrong track, the economy. Voters are evenly split on whether the U.S. economy is strong today or not. So you can see it's 50-50. This is of August. Slightly up from a third, just over a third of voters say their personal finance situation is improving. You still have a lot of Americans, look at this, getting worse, 42%, improving 35%, no opinion 23%. So still a majority of Americans think. Now, okay, Trump's approval is still at 47%. This is Harvard.
Can you go back? It's important to notice that curve, how it's skewed with COVID. So that yellow curve, shot up during the COVID years, and it still hasn't recovered to the like pre-COVID.
Oh, right here. Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we still haven't recovered to what we were back, during Obama and Trump won.
Right, right. Now here you have the approval rate. Now again, this goes back and forth. He's maintained a rather steady 47%, and this is what the stats. I look at all these different polls. Now the economy, okay, fighting crime. Okay, so here you have him seizing Washington D.C. And also talking about seizing Chicago, setting up an ice base up there, and in some I don't know where the hell he'd do it, over at the Navy's where the Navy trains or somewhere like that near Chicago, to launch an operation into Chicago, returning America to its values. Now again, we can argue about this. These just an example. These questions of American history. There's executive orders he ordered for the Smithsonian just recently. The whole value issue and immigration. Okay, it's lowest on trade and policy and trade policy. Then GOP approval at 47%. Now here you have disapprove 53. So again, we go back and forth on this. But here's the interesting problem for the Democrats, of course, that they are still underwater. I see lower. Usually, I've seen some as low as 30%. So the Democratic Party is actually losing members. I think there was an article about that in the Times about a week ago. Now, congressional approval, that's sort of interesting. That's still pretty low. 37% of Americans feel they're doing the job. Most of Americans do not. Somewhat disapprove, strongly disapprove. That's about 53%. Now, Trump and RFK Jr. are the most popular figures. Now, I find that interesting. That RFK Jr. is popular. That sort of was a little amusing for me to see. But Trump, of course, retains his cult-like admiration. Now, again, U.S. military, the police, public universities, the FBI, and Harvard. And I found that amusing. U.S. military still, of course, and police have high favorability ratings. Public universities. I'm sort of surprised that Harvard is even up there because people have a great problem with education. Perhaps that Harvard's basically been fighting them, but they're on the verge of, I believe, a $500 million settlement with Trump on the whole all the mishigash from the past couple of years. Inflation and economy are the top issues with voters. Immigration has dropped in its salience this month. So that's interesting. Now we can again speculate about what that's happening. Immigration, I think they always like to boost that up. Across the partisan spectrum, inflation is the most important issue to voters personally, which makes sense. It's the economy, stupid, and I think that that's something that people will come in now. Now, how they're looking at Trump. Over 2 in 5 voters say Trump is doing worse than expected. A small majority say he's outperforming Biden. Um, Most voters remain satisfied with their presidential choice. So that is interesting how it portends to affect the midterms. A plurality of voters say Trump's policies will make them worse off, and over half think they will increase inflation. That, of course, is where the Democrats are trying to exploit that issue. The counter, of course, is implementing gerrymandering, having people in the Homeland Security out there to control the voting rights, eliminating mail-in votes, all the things we see going on. Voters are split on the success of Trump's deals, and a decreasing majority believe he will reach a deal with China. Um, Now this issue of solving global conflicts, 59% are skeptical on Ukraine, 64% on Israel, Hamas, up 5 points from July. I'm going to talk about Israel in a minute. Lowering drug prices, deporting illegal immigrants, are cutting government waste are most supported policies. So all this stuff we hear about Doge, most of us are seeing the negative aspects of Doge, but it does get popular support. Adding Medicaid requirements, tariffs, and military strikes are the least. So interesting. Tariffs do not do too well politically. Military strikes, people are uh, little skeptical about. But he still has, a support to some extent on those. 3 in 5 voters want Democrats to take a wait and see approach on his actions. So that's interesting. That's an interesting little insight. Now, the economy and jobs. Voters trust Trump slightly more than the Dems to manage the economy. And most
What
say,
do you mean, man? Where's slightly? Oh, 54 to 46?
yeah, yeah. And most say Trump is, rather than Biden, is responsible for the economy. So there's a little bit of a contradiction there. Voters remain divided over the impact of Trump's policies on the economy and jobs. So that's sort of interesting because you know that, if you turn on MSNBC, they're always like going bananas about the tariffs, about this, about that, and inflation. You looked at this study that Fortune just did. Fortune magazine just did a study which talks about the tariffs basically eroding the tax giveaways by 50%. So anyway, we'll see. And that, of course, is like, not everybody reads Fortune magazine, but people will feel it in their pocketbooks. Voters are also split on the impact of his policies on investments, and a small majority say Trump is losing the battle against inflation. So that, of course, that could, of course, have widened. Who knows? Uh, Most voters say that the tariffs are harming the economy. Now, that's not that big a difference, 55 to 45. Um, Voters are split on jobs data reliability. Over half say fewer than $50,000. Remember, he fired the BLS guy and he put in this basically flunky from Heritage who turns out he's a big neo-Nazi lover. It's sort of amusing as all hell. But anyway, um, here is the issue of, the question of changing the monthly reports that usually people in the business world, I know guys who, work down in the banks down there, they're not too happy about this. Voters are divided on Trump's firing of labor statistics said a slim majority say the firing was political. Now, obviously, it was political, but it's been interesting. People basically agree. Look at that 47% feel it was necessary. So he still has that base of support that's pretty strong. Voters are split on whether his policies will lead to economic growth. I'd say that's interesting. Um, Economic news still seen as negative, but positive coverage ticked up this month. Most say the United States is not in recession. Now, that's another interesting question because we know that, they had that big battle over the job growth being so low, and that's why you removed the BLS guy. But at the same time, you can't hide the reality of the economy if, in fact, there is problems going on. But we'll see what happens. Now, the deployment of the National Guard. 40% say crime is increasing in the country, but nearly half say it's staying about the same in the community. So it's split about this. It's back and forth about the question of crime and public safety. Again, these issues have been with us ever since the 60s. Most voters view their communities, rural areas, and suburbs as safe, while larger cities are viewed as unsafe. Again, we know what the crime stats are. They've actually diminished. Homicides diminished. I know in New York it has. But again, these are perceptions that people feel. And it's obviously in Trump's interest to build up the perception that cities are viewed as unsafe. Voters are split on recent crime trends in D.C., and most say the level of crime there is comparable to other places. Well, that's not true. The actual facts are different than that, but that's, again, perceptions. Politics is perceptions. Around 7 in 10 voters have heard about Trump declaring an emergency in D.C. and deploying the National Guard. Slight majorities support declaring a crime emergency in D.C. and deploying the National Guard. That's interesting. While 53%, so that's interesting. So he has public support with a thin margin over sending the National Guard into Washington, D.C., which, again, if I was sitting there in Washington in the National Security Council or in the Domestic Policy Council, there it would be where I would encourage Trump to be saying the things he's saying about threatening to take over Baltimore, threatening to take over Chicago from their point of view. That's how they perceive it. A slight majority says Trump's actions in D.C. are justified and necessary, while about half voters say the National Guard will make the city more safe. Okay, so from this point, he has a little bit of an edge politically from the polling. Voters are split on the necessity of expanding federal law enforcement in D.C. Now, that again, we'll see what happens. Now he's talking about initiating the death penalty. Okay, so you can see that this policy decision by him to send in the National Guard, it has a little bit of the public support is not overwhelming, but it's enough to make a decision in that direction for him to do it, seen as something that serves his political self-interest. A slight majority says Trump's D.C. actions are a distraction, and nearly 3 in 4 believe he'll take similar actions in other cities. I agree.
Well, could you go back? Where did it say he did it for his own personal benefit?
That's me saying that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was in the survey.
No. A slight majority say are they a distraction, and nearly 3 in 4 believe he will take similar actions in other cities. That's where most people think he's going to do this again. Okay. And he said, now let's look at the Epstein case. This is, I think, the big kahuna here. Most voters are familiar with the Epstein case and have heard about the Epstein findings memo released in July. Nearly 2/3 say that transparency is important to their opinion of President Trump. So here's where they're on a hot potato. Voters are unsatisfied with how the Epstein case has been handled by the Trump administration officials. And I think that's across all political tendencies, independent, Republican, Democrat. 4 in 5 say the Epstein case involves a cover-up, and 2/3 want lawmakers to press Trump for answers. So the Democrats in the Congress have public support to do what they're doing to press. Because if anybody had read that transcript, I finished reading it. It's complete bullshit. It's essentially but read it yourself. Of course, I'm giving you my objective opinion about it. 3 in 5 voters believe the letter published by the Wall Street Journal is authentic. Now, again, they've actually subpoenaed the Epstein estates to actually produce that letter where supposedly Trump, did his little cartoon scribbles of a woman's private parts. Only independent media has a trusted majority of voters to provide full transparency on the Epstein case. Again, that is very interesting because, again, that sort of is a weakness for Trump politically. This is why this issue is, again, a hot potato for them. The mainstream or independent media are the most trusted outlets for information about the Epstein case. Now, remember, he's always trying to ridicule them. He's threatening to pull licenses. He went bananas over ABC and NBC a few days ago, talking about going to the FCC chairman Carr, and Carr, of course, has always from the start been talking. Before they even came into office in January 20th, Carr was talking about using the FCC to pull licenses. So that is something, and as some of us involved with Pacifica know, I personally think that that's something they'll pull out of a rabbit hat at some point. Now let's look at Israel and the Middle East. Most voters continue to support Israel or Hamas and agree Hamas must release all the hostages. Now look what's going on in Israel right now. There are demonstrations in the streets. As of last week, there were demonstrations, disruptions in Tel Aviv of traffic. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are opposed to the policy of Netanyahu to mobilize 60,000 troops, which means he's going to increase the size of the force in Gaza by probably 100%. That's about 3 to 4 divisions of troops to be mobilized to be fighting in Gaza. And their objective is to take Gaza City and forcibly push that population down to Rafah. So that is what is happening right now. And we know we can talk about the journalism issue, the targeting of Al Jazeera journalists. I mean, they had one guy, a bunch of guys they killed last week. They said the guy was a missileer. The other guys that they killed a few days ago, I don't think they've really come up with an excuse for that one. But anyway, they said that was a mistake. But again, the problem, and then you have even someone like Piers Morgan, who has been interesting to watch his evolution on this. He has been talking about, and I agree 100%. The journalistic community has to be allowed in there, and the Israelis aren't allowing them in. So that's interesting that there is support for Israel over Hamas, but they also agree that Hamas wants to release all the hostages. But then nearly 6 in 10 want Hamas to exit Gaza as a condition for a deal. So here you have Trump has support to sort of give Netanyahu a little bit of a green light. It gets more complicated, though. Voters remain divided over Trump's handling of Israel Hamas. So there's division about this in the body politic. Voters are split on their views of Israel's conduct, but overwhelmingly disapprove of the conduct of Hamas. All right. So that, again, is not a big revelation, I think. But the issue of the famine. Most voters believe there is a famine in Gaza, and 3 in 5 believe Hamas is mainly responsible. Now, I don't agree with that, but that's their perception. This is the perception that people believe Hamas is mainly responsible. So Trump has essentially, through, the facts, I think, are different than that. It was after March 13th when the Israelis decided to throw the ceasefire out the door. They essentially, for weeks and weeks, did not allow any trucks into Gaza. So I don't agree with that. But that's, again, we're dealing with perceptions. Politics is perceptions. Voters are evenly divided on the motivations of criticism of Israel and whether or not Israel is committing a genocide. 50-50. That's a significant difference in American public opinion compared to the past. Do you believe that a criticism of Israel's conduct in the Israel-Hamas conflict is motivated more by anti-Semitism or motivated more by concern for Palestinian human rights? So look at that. 51% Palestinian human rights, 49% anti-Semitism. Very interesting. That's a really significant division in American public opinion. Majorities of voters support providing both offensive and defensive military aid to Israel. They still got political support to do that. There remains broad support for Israel over Iran. Now, that's a whole different ballgame. All right, because America has never, the whole hostage crisis. I know people who were hostages. I've been around these people for like the past 50 years, 30 years. We've been at war with Iran ever since. So there's support for that. There's strong consensus for blocking Iran's nukes, and 2/3 favor a deal that permanently does so. Okay, so that doesn't surprise me. Voters continue to support stopping Iran's nuclear program. Overwhelming. Look at that, 88%. Ukraine, Russia. While 3 in 5 voters support Trump efforts in the war, a majority do not believe he should win a Nobel Prize for his work at this stage. And that's sort of amusing because he, of course, believes he should. He's now citing, 6 wars he stopped and all that. And there's actually good reporting on the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. Most of them don't feel he should get a damn thing. 3 in 5 voters say Trump's Putin meeting was unsuccessful, and they are split in the talks with Zelensky and the Europeans. Now, again, Putin's basically, these are perceptions. We can talk about that on the outside. Nevertheless, over half say Trump deserves credit for orchestrating these meetings, and 3 in 5 doubt Biden could have done the same. Again, perceptions. 2/3 of voters say Putin is playing games with the West, while 2/3 say Zelensky genuinely wants to end the war. Again, perceptions. And 2/3 of voters want Trump to arm Ukraine and sanction Russia, and nearly 7 in 10 back security guarantees for Ukraine. Now, 2/3 of voters want Trump to arm Ukraine and sanction Russia. That is against the MAGA ethos in the main. And I think that that's where I tend to think that Trump is going back and forth on that one. I don't believe that he's tried to reorganize NATO. I think that, I mean, I don't accept that. That's my personal opinion. Should Ukraine receive direct security guarantees? Now, Trump has basically said there's been some amorphous kind of guarantees, and basically the thing is, Putin said, forget about it. He's not going to go for that at all. And NATO, forget about it. Voters still say Trump is too soft on Putin, while plurality saying he has the right approach with Zelensky up from July. Okay, so you see Mixer's opinion. Too tough, not tough enough. And this is dealing with Zelensky. About right. Um, Voters continue to say America's relationship with Ukraine is more important than with Russia. Look at how different that is. Again, that's perceptions, but we know that the MAGA, we remember when they made it pretty clear before the election and as they've been in office since January, they do not have that same perception about this question. So this is interesting that he has to maneuver this. And finally, just over half of voters say that they're satisfied with Trump's handling of Ukraine-Russia talks. Okay, so that's the latest Harvard opinion poll. Julian, go on, Julian.
Yeah, I was better informed with the last 5 slides, where it looks like 2/3 of Americans support Ukraine rather than Russia. But I was confused by how many Americans were pushing, or not pushing, rather supporting Trump's initiative for peace. When the Ukrainians, I mean, if you have to rank their preferences, they'd like to get a durable peace, which is not what's being offered. They'd like to get their land back. They definitely don't want peace at any cost. And that struck me that the American voters were bizarrely, unnaturally more sympathetic to Russia than to, say, Israel. And I understand why there's legacy support for Israel. It's from the Cold War. It's from the boomers who saw the Holocaust, or whose parents saw the Holocaust. But Israel's spending an enormous amount of effort to try to get support, where, near as I can tell, Ukrainian public affairs efforts are pretty thin. And the Russians have got some weird hacks on YouTube with their very strange channels. And so it looks like Russia's more successful, and at least partially. I mean, people don't trust Putin, but Russia's more successful at selling its brand than Israel is, which I thought was very, very peculiar. I mean, I could see how, for a boomer, the what's going on in Gaza, which I think is a genocide, is it can be mixed in with what was going on there before, which is pretty no holds barred, brutal massacres of Jews by Palestinians in the 50s. Whereas I tune in on the war going on in Ukraine, and I see a Russian tank blasting an apartment building. And somehow it doesn't provoke Americans in the way that it would have in the 1980s. So I found that peculiar. I know in the later slides it shows that Americans trust Zelensky more than they do Putin. But for me, that it struck me that Ukraine's not doing their job in terms of publicizing what's happening, or Americans are living in a self-created bubble. Which is remarkable.
All right, now here's a poll that just came out today by Quinnipiac. Voters, 56% oppose the decision to send National Guard troops to Washington. Now, when you deal with the splits, 86% of Republicans favor it, 93% of Democrats oppose it. This is important for Trump. 61% of independents oppose it. Men are split about the decision, 50-50 supporting it. This gets back to the issue of gender we talked about, while 63% oppose sending the National Guard. Now, in terms of support of Donald Trump, 37% of voters support the way he's handling his job as president, while 55% disapprove. Republicans, 84%. He's got that still solid support among Republicans. That's where the Epstein thing is a problem for him. While Democrats, 98% do not approve, and 58% of independents disapprove. Again, I remember what I showed you was that the Democratic, we have all this problem. The Democratic Party seems to be going through a problem similar to the Whigs in the aftermath of the Mexican War. In other words, remember, the Whigs disappeared as a party, and then who replaced them? The Republicans. The Republican Party and other different strands came in to form the Republican Party in the 1850s. And so the Democratic Party is in some ways in a sort of not completely analogy to that, but similar. Voters were asked for his handling of different issues. So 42% approve of his his policy towards crime, 54% disapprove. Talks to end the war between Russia and Ukraine, 40% approve, 52% disapprove. Economy, 39% approve, 57% disapprove. I'm sure the splits in terms of partisanship are as extreme as what I just said. Now, here is interesting about Israel-Gaza. 60% of voters in this poll that just came out today oppose the United States sending more military aid to Israel for their efforts in the war with Hamas. That is very different. That is a different kind of polling decision point than I've seen in the past. While 32% supported. Now, how that's going to translate itself on Capitol Hill, interesting question. There's all these very powerful interest groups that are opposed to that. Democrats, 75% of Democrats and 66% of independents oppose sending more aid to Israel, while 56% of Republicans support it. And look at how many Republicans don't support it, 37%. Voters were asked whether their sympathies lie with more Israelis or more with the Palestinians. 37% say with the Palestinians, 36% with the Israelis, and 27% did not offer an opinion. That's pretty high for a general national poll. The issue of genocide. 50% of voters think Israel is committing genocide based on what they know about the situation in Gaza. And you see that the split is partisan, of course. Democrats, 77% think a genocide is going on, 51% of independents, 64% of Republicans do not think Israel is committing a genocide. And the issue of Russia-Ukraine, which I'll end, 4 to 10 voters are very confident or somewhat confident that Trump can broker a permanent peace, while 59% are either not confident or not so confident. And 76% of American voters do not trust that President Vladimir Putin will stand by any peace agreement to end the war between Russia and Ukraine if one is reached. So that's interesting. Again, it splits along partisan lines. So again, the Epstein files. Yeah, we can't exclude that one. So 7 out of 10 voters say they're following news about the Jeffrey Epstein files very closely. Now that's quite significant. 70% are following that. 2/3 disapprove of how the Trump administration is handling it. Well, 19% approve and 14% do not approve. Now let's look. 44% of Republicans approve the way he's handling it. That means they bought into this latest strategy of the transcripts and only releasing less than 1% of the actual data. We'll see how that works out with the kind of hearings going on. Well, 34% approve, pretty high. And again, the Democrats, it splits along different lines. But look at how high it's with independents. 73% of independents disapprove of how he's handling the Epstein files. 92% of Republicans. That's very high. That's where you can see the Democrats are like going bananas with this. Now, the question of the Smithsonian, this whole question of how history is to be altered to be, this whole, going back to, conservative, who knows, what can we say? Like, the slavery didn't exist, etc. Voters were asked about the Trump administration's plan for a comprehensive internal view of exhibitions at 8 of the Smithsonian museums. 60% of Americans oppose it. 33% support it. Now, again, it goes along partisan lines. Nearly 70% of Republicans support the review. So we're going to have a review, of course. While 94% of Democrats and 66% of independents oppose the review. So interesting data just released. Okay, go on, Julian. No, Julian's left. I chased him away. Yeah.
No, he's still here. He's still here. He's just not in front of the
not in front of the camera. Okay, so any reactions to that? That's the latest opinion polls.
what
Yes.
was the body of people that were polled by both those two polls? Are they
Oh,
Harvard students or Harvard public or?
no. If these guys are going to start putting, they will. The interesting question, Kenny. But if you're going to actually do polling like that, you can't do stuff like that. You can't actually have you have to have a reflective sample to,
Does
and
it
make those.
does it
And
define what their sampling is somewhere on
no,
the
it
poll?
doesn't. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But those are good questions. The sampling is very important. I agree. But you can't dismiss the findings just simply because you disagree with them. I mean, like,
No, I'm just saying it's the validity. First of all, the relevance of all of this is how people are going to vote, right? What's the difference what people think?
right,
It doesn't.
how people think is how they perceive an event is more important than whether the event actually happened or not. If
No, I understand that, but the net result is
well, the net
this.
result
This is to predict how they're going to vote.
it's the net result is then you figure out how you're going to spend your strategy to further move those needles in your direction and have people then support you politically or vote for you. But it's just a snapshot in August of 2025. We're months away from the midterms being a realistic issue, but it shows you how people are maneuvering in that context.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's interesting in terms of a study of the society, but in terms of an analysis for political purposes, it should only be polling registered voters or people
Well,
likely to vote.
okay, good point. But I'm not aware if they break that down. Uh, the question of registered voter, see, that gets into the question of what we're seeing right now with registered voters. One, gerrymandering. You're trying to create districts that have certainty of a political outcome. That's going to happen all throughout America. It's happening in California, happening in Texas. The Republicans will probably, given the configuration of the different states, they'll probably get the advantage in gaining more votes for the
Right.
House election. Secondly, they're going after the Voting Rights Act. They want to knock it. They succeeded with the Holder case. Holder always, former Attorney General always gets angry. I always laugh. He says, "Oh boy, they always put my name to that case." But that case was defeated years ago. The Supreme Court further weakened the Voting Rights Act, and now there's a case that will essentially further weaken it, if not cripple it forever. That's another thing going on. The question of eliminating mail-in ballots, which actually has always been a bipartisan thing, but Trump decides, he wants to make it more difficult for people to vote. They have to come in and, the whole issue of having to show up and whether you're a citizen or not. This is all, xenophobic crap on his part. But
So
that's what
you
he
think?
gets. That's what I mean. Well, that's what I think. Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah,
I think I'm right about
that's
that. I'm thinking I'm right.
well. I don't know. I don't know, but you choose to say it's crap. You don't choose to say it's deceptive, it's improper, it's not good government. You say it's
Well,
crap.
I have a objective opinion about it. And I think it's crap. Anyway,
Okay.
you haven't heard from Michael yet. Michael has been curiously,
Michael just came so late.
yeah, Michael's late. So let's let Michael jump in with the last words here. Go on, Michael.
Well, I guess I could say, yeah, I did have a big problem getting on. It took me about 45 minutes. But first of all, I don't hold much stock in polls because first, the polls we know have been proven wrong in the recent past, drastically wrong in some cases, and also the context in which the questions were asked. I mean, you can see there are some results that are almost contradictory in some of these polls. So it's probably, it's like we used to say about the audition process. It stinks, but it's the only thing we have. So I guess, yeah, it's the only way we can deduce what Americans in general are thinking. But I wouldn't put too much stock in its accuracy. Some cases they get it right, in some cases they don't. But I see inconsistencies and also dangerous trends that may or may not be accurate. For instance, if you're interested in a two-state solution in the Middle East, which I am, the fact that there's still overwhelming American support for Israel, but they do feel as opposed to Hamas. It's overwhelmingly in support of Israel over Hamas, but then it's almost split even as to whether or not they think Hamas is fighting for Palestinian rights, which would make me deduce, accurately or inaccurately, that there's a lot of people that just don't support, in other words, they're against Hamas because they support Palestinian rights. So I don't know, you have these results, and they try to do a as objective as possible. Their polling is as objectively as possible, but it doesn't. I mean, when people answer polls, first of all, they have to understand it. Second of all, you have to you have to know the context in which they're understanding it, so that are they getting exact? In other words, are they perceiving the questions the way they were meant to be perceived? It's a real problem. So I just don't. I didn't react because I just don't put that much stock in them. Again, it's better than nothing, but not much better than nothing.
Well, today, before I came, I bumped into somebody who is a veteran of the IDF, who took Rashid Halidi's class, who is a former advisor to Arafat, who said basically to Columbia University, go screw yourself because of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which says that if you criticize Israel, you have to automatically be anti-Semite, which I consider idiotic. And this individual, who served 2 tours in Gaza, wrote an editorial page where he said, "Look, this is ridiculous. I'm an Israeli. I've criticized my government many times, and I think about, do I like Hamas? I've never liked Hamas. I've never agreed with Hamas, even when they were formed in '87. But I understood Hamas. Did I then think that I wasn't in favor of Palestinian national rights? Of course I was. And the two-state solution, unfortunately, is something that the Netanyahu government is doing its best to bury and put into history. And frankly, I think the Trump administration is working overtime to do that too. Remember, Trump just said that we're going to resolve this whole mess in 2 or 3 weeks. Now, maybe he's received some intelligence estimate based on the deployment of the IDF and reinforcing it. So they're going to sit there and force all those people from the north to go down to, and it looks like they're setting up 2 more GHF centers down the south to receive all those different people. So, we're going to be seeing in front of us something. It doesn't, it certainly makes sense that that Trump admires Andrew Jackson, because we're going to see the modern equivalent of the Trail of Tears in front of our face, in terms of this displacement of Palestinians. And does that mean I don't support Israel? Of course I support Israel. Do I support what they're doing in Gaza? Absolutely not. So I think I can have those contradictory feelings like everyone else can.
Well, yeah, that's possible, but I mean, that's your particular case. But when we do these polls, we don't know. In other words, unless everybody comes forward. By the way, there's one other thing I did want to say. When they ask, for instance, if somebody is, and I don't remember if we actually have this in the poll, and I have this pet peeve about definitions, which I think the word genocide is overused.
Well, let's not get into that. We could spend hours arguing about that.
Yeah. But were they given, in other words, when somebody said, do you think they're committing genocide, were they given the definition of genocide, definition that the established definition? And did they read it carefully? In other words, do people fully understand? We're talking about Americans, remember. Do people really understand what they're being asked? And are they articulating, even though it's in writing, are they articulating their answers properly? I mean, there's so many factors that go into this polling situation that can distort it. It's just, I don't know. Again, I'm just skeptical when I hear these polls, and we all know what happened with the polls prior to
In
Trump's
Iowa. Right,
election.
Iowa. Right. But I have to say, Michael, I don't consider Americans. I mean, I don't consider the mass Americans like basically Homer Simpson. Okay, I mean, actually, Homer Simpson, of course, has his cachet, but I don't consider them all a bunch of Homer Simpsons. And at the same time, I was sorry that Julian brought up South Park because I was sort of curious to get people's impression of that because we're right back to the issue of harsh political satire does a better job in looking at the political situation than the mainstream news or even the networks or the cable outlets because South Park basically with those several episodes, particularly the first two ones, nailed it. And again, Trump is going nuts and over that. We have that whole thing that happened with late night shows and all that, Colbert being replaced, etc. But anyway, I just figured that'd be an interesting way to conclude. Kenny, you have any final thoughts? You got to unmute, Kenny.
I guess that's his final thought.
No.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
here's my no. I give you a final thought. Wherever you live, check your internet and see if there's a local concert going down. Because I know here in LA, there's like 4 or 5 concerts. Even the summer's not over. So get out of the house and go to a concert, usually on Thursday nights.
Oh, that's a pretty good idea. All right. Well, I'd like to thank Julie and Joan,
Later
Carolyn.
on, going viral.
Right. Yes, I'd like to thank Julie and Joan and Carolyn and Amy. Thank you for bringing Danny on, Julie. He was great.
Oh,
And
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
yeah, he was great. It's too bad the other economists weren't here tonight. We'd had fun with them.
Oh, I'll send him the links for future calls.
Yeah. And Julian's coming back into the operation here. Thank you, Julian, earlier. That was a very interesting discussion to listen about Taiwan, which I do not want to digress because I'd like to go to sleep right now. But we can talk about that
You
sometime.
got to show up to more of his. I mean, his he's got
That was pretty good. That was pretty good. It was definitely good.
Chip and Professor Camps
Yeah, we
are
don't.
really smart guys.
Well, yeah, I don't want to get into that, but it was very good. And tomorrow, of course, Ivan's going to talk about the Spanish impact on the American Revolution. And trust me, I'm having a lot of fun with the American Revolution now. I'm getting into the groove, and we're going to get a lot more scholars. It looks like I've been looking through all the books, and it looks like all the guys I really want to get, they're either dead or they're retired or they're on the verge of death. Uh, but we'll get them, and I think we'll be able to have a lot of interesting discussions about it and understand it better. But anyway, you guys have a good night. Take it easy.
Thank you, Jim. Bye, Ken.
Bye.
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 Bye, y'all.
Bye. Thank you.